Human? Nurse Alice asked, her voice even. Nick was forced to unveil his past. The reason was simple. Nurse Alice believed Nick was a Specter, and Specters never threw their lives away for anything. So no matter how many times Nick swore he was willing to sacrifice himself to kill her unless she revealed her secrets, she'd think he was bluffing. She'd only believe it when he actually did it, and by then it would be too late. But what if Nick wasn't a Specter? What if he was a human at heart? Then it would be believable. There were plenty of humans who sacrificed their lives for others. Then it was possible Nick would sacrifice himself to kill her. Yes, I used to be human, Nick said. My name was Nick Dusk, and I became a Specter when I consumed a peak elder. Impossible, Nurse Alice commented. A peak expert can't consume a peak elder. And yet I did, Nick said. I did exactly what I'm doing right now. I kept fighting it. I lost memories. But I wouldn't give up. Either it gave in or we would both die. Specters never give up their lives, that's their strength. But it's also their weakness. They are too smart for their own good. It got to choose, becoming a slave and somewhat survive or die with me. Its Specter core encased my Zephyx synchronizer, and when I became a specialist, my Zephyx synchronizer fused with the Specter core. That's how I became a Specter. Nurse Alice remained silent for a while as Zephyx gathered around her. She was using some kind of ability, but Nick didn't know which. A moment later, the beam pointing to Nurse Alice became completely black, and Nick's power multiplier fell to 5-fold. She used some kind of ability to confirm my words. I don't know how she did it, but she found out almost everything about me just now. Nick Dusk, former liaison of Crimson City, Nurse Alice said. That is me, Nick confirmed. You hid your traces well, she commented. I almost couldn't see your past. Then you know what I'm capable of, Nick said. So, she asked, this changes nothing. You live for humanity, and as far as I can see, you are the only one with the fitting abilities to infiltrate your enemy. Your survival is more important than the survival of all the other humans. You won't sacrifice your life. I will, Nick answered. You won't, Nurse Alice answered. I don't believe you. This was troublesome. Nick needed Nurse Alice's knowledge of energy manipulation. Otherwise, the mission wouldn't succeed. Without her knowledge, the Nightmen wouldn't be able to grow strong enough to resist the aliens. This was exactly what Nick didn't want to happen. Do not force me to prove you wrong, Nick said. Do it, Nurse Alice said. Why are you so against this? Nick asked. It's just some knowledge. I'm protecting my survival. I'm a Specter, she answered. If an incident happens, the Eternals will reset with the era. There's a 100% chance that I will die if you fail, which has a 95% chance. Meanwhile, the chances of you sacrificing yourself to kill me are below 50%. I'm simply choosing the better option. Nick took a deep breath. This was the worst possible scenario. This was even worse than if Nurse Alice wasn't the caretaker. Fine, Nick said, I will prove it to you. Nick left through a portal he created. He had to use his last resort. Nurse Alice's knowledge was too important. Without her help, humanity would never be free. But he had to prove he was willing to sacrifice his life. After leaving, Nick flew straight to Deep Core Base and entered the Pure One's containment unit. He didn't leave for 5 entire years. When he came out, his eyes were filled with determination. He had to prove he was willing to sacrifice everything. Nick traveled to Crimson City and entered Rising Star Base. He cleaned up the traces he'd left in the past, then looked at the containment unit holding the Jolly Cannibal. Oh, you're back, the Jolly Cannibal transmitted. Bang! Nick exploded into mist and shot at the Jolly Cannibal. He buried his blades into its chest, and its body turned into star energy. But Nick protected the Specter core and suppressed its Zephyx so it couldn't recover. Then he looked at the Specter core. Remember when I first arrived here? He asked. The Jolly Cannibal couldn't answer, but it could still perceive Nick's words. Due to its power, the Jolly Cannibal could resist Nick's memory manipulation ability. But that was exactly why Nick had retrieved the Specter core. If it dared to resist, he would kill it. So the Jolly Cannibal was forced to obey. After all, it was just a Specter, and it wanted to survive at all cost. Over the next few hours, Nick deleted all its memories of him. Then he deleted its memories of the other 3 bases. He also deleted its memories of the Pure One, Nurse Alice, and the Ice Maiden. When he was done, The Jolly Cannibal was just a normal Specter that knew a lot about engineering. "Remember when I attacked you?" Nick asked. Then Nick threw the Specter core into the middle of the containment unit and vanished. The Jolly Cannibal instantly recovered and looked around in confusion. It was sure something had just happened, but it didn't know what. Oh well, it was still alive and just needed to wait. At some point, someone would find it. Oh, how right it was. Nick went to the center of Rising Star Base. "I want to die," Nick said. Immediately, Nurse Alice's senses locked onto him. Nick gritted his teeth. "Oh, son," he said, "I have found a functional base from the Enlightened Ones, and there is a peak adversary here. It is in the pillar below the city." Chapter 918. It was done. Nick had doomed Rising Star Base. This was part of the Pure One's plan. The Pure One agreed that humanity needed Nurse Alice's knowledge. Without it, the knowledge repositories might as well not exist. Of course, Nick had spent those 5 years with the Pure One passing on the Jolly Cannibal's knowledge. The Pure One now also knew everything about engineering, which meant the engineering knowledge repository of the Enlightened Ones wasn't lost. Nick looked in Nurse Alice's direction. "The Ice Maiden will be next," Nick said. Nurse Alice remained silent as she looked at Nick from the other side of the planet. This guy had actually done it. Alerting the sun to even one of the bases would put everything in jeopardy. The sun might search for even more hidden bases, which would endanger all the knowledge repositories of the Empire. This guy was mad. He was literally cutting off his leg to show that he would be willing to kill himself. This put Nurse Alice in a predicament. For the first time, she believed Nick might actually kill himself if she refused to teach him energy manipulation. She was stuck between a rock and a hard place. Any choice would have a 90% chance of death. Yet she still decided against teaching Nick. He could sacrifice one knowledge repository, but he wouldn't destroy all of them. That would ruin everything. Then humanity wouldn't have any hope left anyway. And this madman would have nothing holding him back anymore. It was a tough choice. Several days passed, and eventually the sun contacted Nick. "How did you find this base?" it asked. "I was searching through the ruins to learn more about old technology. That was when I found it," Nick said. "Tell me everything about it." Nick quickly told the sun a fake version of events. The sun remained silent for a while. Most likely, the aliens were holding a meeting right now to decide how to proceed. Nick was in danger right now. It was possible that they would kill him with the base. Nurse Alice knew that too, which was why she started to believe him. He was literally putting his life on the line right now. "I will remember your contributions," the sun said. "You have unearthed something of significant importance. If you continue contributing, I will allow you to become an eternal." "Thank you," Nick answered. "What shall I do with the base?" "No need," the sun answered. "The base has been dealt with." "Affirmative," Nick said. Then the sun stopped looking at Nick. He had survived. Some days later, Nick paid a visit to Crimson City. Everything appeared normal. But when he entered Rising Star Base, he found it empty. All the machines were gone. The containment unit containing the Jolly Cannibal was empty. It was like it had been empty this entire time. It looked eerie. The sun most likely told the Null to take care of the base. This was the most probable explanation. The Maw didn't have this kind of subtlety, and Nurse Alice hadn't moved. The sun would have probably destroyed the entire city, and the Nightmare couldn't do stuff like that. Nick also didn't think the sun had some sort of adversary as an agent. That only left the Null. As expected, the Null is the cleaner of unwanted information. It's probably a program or machine like the sun. After a while, Nick left the base again. "I want to kill myself," Nick said, several kilometers underground. Nurse Alice immediately looked at him. "Yes or no?" Nick asked. "The Ice Maiden is next." Nurse Alice didn't answer for several seconds. This was such an insanely difficult choice. Both sides led to death. Nick waited. Minutes passed. Death or death? What would Nurse Alice choose? Her forgotten past was clashing with her new reality. She was a Specter. She worked for the sun. She got unending power and could live forever. This was always what she wanted. Yet she was also reminded of when she'd just been a hatchling. When she grew up with the other three, she also believed in humanity's ideals. The ideals did not come to her naturally, and trying to understand how humans thought was like learning a foreign language. Her desires did not align with humanity, but she had once believed in them regardless. When she was younger, she was like the Ice Maiden of today. The Ice Maiden also didn't have an inherent understanding of humanity, but in a certain way, she also saw herself as human. After breaking out, Nurse Alice discarded her past. She wanted to follow her desires. She wanted to do what Specters do. That was the only thing that came to her naturally. She had believed in the Empire. Then it failed, and the old Emperor was turned into the nightmare. She knew about that. She knew the Emperor, and the signs were clear. The Empire had been so powerful. The humans of today were ants in front of the Empire. If even the Empire failed, how could anyone else succeed? The Empire had been a giant, and it still failed. If she trusted Nick, she would die with certainty. But if she didn't believe Nick, this guy would continue destroying knowledge repositories. At what point would everything become unrecoverable? If all hope was lost, would Nick actually go through with it, or would he embrace his Specter desires? Nick could become just like Nurse Alice. There was hope, but it was tiny. Either choice led to death. No, Nurse Alice answered after several minutes. Nick's eyes darkened. Then the Ice Maiden will be next, Nick said. You won't do it, Nurse Alice answered. Nick's expression became cold and emotionless. Give me 5 years. Then Nick went further underground and hid himself. Since Nurse Alice wasn't following him, Nick managed to escape her perception. Once he'd escaped her perception, he went a deep core base again. He stayed in the Pure One's containment unit for another 5 years. And when he came out, his eyes were cold and determined. Chapter 919. Nick traveled to the underground city. The first thing he did was delete the memories of the Ice Maiden and Piercing Heaven base from everyone's mind, including Samar. Then he disconnected Piercing Heaven base from the city. After disconnecting it, Nick built a Zephyx generator and shoved the underground city far deeper underground. It needed to be as hidden as possible. Then Nick moved Piercing Heaven base closer to the surface and far away from the underground city. It had to be relatively easy to find. If it returned to its old position so far underground, Nick wouldn't be able to find an explanation for how he found it. When he finished moving the base, Nick entered and deleted all evidence of human presence. He also replaced the Zephyx generator with a different one that had a lower output. The stored Zephyx had dropped quite a bit, so Nick needed the generator's output to seem consistent with the new level. Finally, he entered the containment unit. When he saw the Ice Maiden, his eyes narrowed. "Oh, you're back," the Ice Maiden said. Bang! Nick exploded forward and destroyed her body, only leaving her Specter core. "Remember when we first met?" Nick asked. At that moment, Nick realized his ability wasn't working. The Ice Maiden refused to let her memories be deleted. "If you refuse, I will kill you right here," Nick said. "Remember when we met for the first time?" Again, his ability failed. "You are willing to sacrifice yourself for humanity?" Nick asked. The Ice Maiden couldn't answer. "Then sacrifice yourself. I am doing this for humanity. Remember when we first met?" It failed again. Nick gritted his teeth. He opened the containment unit and left with the Ice Maiden's Specter core. Finally, he traveled to Deep Core Base and entered the Pure One's containment unit. Nick threw the Specter core into the containment unit, and the Ice Maiden recovered. "I will not risk the Empire's safeguards," the Ice Maiden said with conviction. The Pure One looked at the Ice Maiden and sighed. "We are doing this for humanity," he said. "Did he delete your memories too?" she asked. "No," the Pure One said. "This idea was my plan." Why does he want me to forget everything?" she asked. The Pure One took a deep breath. The caretaker broke out and refuses to tell him anything. The caretaker refuses to believe in humanity anymore. A sacrifice is necessary. The Pure One explained everything to the Ice Maiden. When the Ice Maiden heard that, she looked at the ground. This was human behavior that she had internalized. "So I will die no matter what I do?" the Ice Maiden asked. "I wish there was another choice," the Pure One answered. "If you had just complied," Nick said, "you could have died in peace. You wouldn't even know what happened." "I am doing this for humanity," Nick added. "The Pure One already knows everything about engineering, biology, and energy. He will be the central knowledge repository." The Ice Maiden glared at Nick. "You're ruining the Empire's hope." I am keeping the Empire's hopes alive, Nick answered. I am the only one who can infiltrate the enemy. If I can't infiltrate them and we kill the sun, the entire planet will be destroyed. Every human on Earth could know everything the enlightened ones knew. We could have 100 level 9 extractors. We could have 100 level 9 humans working with pure energy. And it wouldn't make a difference, Nick shouted. We would destroy the sun, kill the warriors of the enemy, and you know what happens then. They will launch a weapon made by the Ancient Ones at Earth, killing everyone. The Ice Maiden still glared at Nick. You don't know that. You haven't seen that weapon. No, but I'm sure it's there. It would be stupid not to have one, Nick answered. Then how can you be sure? The Ice Maiden asked. I can't, Nick said, but are you willing to take the chances? Do you want me to try to infiltrate their base without the knowledge of energy manipulation? The chances of me being found out are way too high. Infiltrating their base early would be too risky. We have to be absolutely sure that nothing will go wrong. I can't take any chances. Humanity's fate rests on my shoulders. I do not have another choice. You will die. If you refuse to let your memories be deleted, I will kill you before alerting the sun. Fine, then do it, the Ice Maiden shouted. If you are truly human at heart, this will weigh on your conscience. You just don't want to feel any guilt for killing me. That's incorrect, and you know that, Nick said. If the sun finds you, the danger I, and by extension Nurse Alice, will be much greater. If I kill you before the sun finds out, it won't have an impact. And then, Nick said as he looked at the Pure One, I might also need to sacrifice him. This has to have a significant impact so that I don't have to sacrifice more. I have to make every sacrifice count. The Ice Maiden gritted her teeth. I see, the Pure One said. It's for humanity. The Ice Maiden looked at the ground, unwilling. But the Empire, she said. Will live on, the Pure One said. The Empire never had a chance since it never knew about the location of the enemy. He knows the location. He knows what the enemy is capable of. Even without our knowledge, his chances of success would still be higher than the Empire's. Because the Empire never had a chance to begin with. It's time to trust in the new Emperor. The Ice Maiden looked to the side. Several seconds of silence passed. Then a conflicting expression appeared on her face. Fine, she said. Go ahead. I will sacrifice myself for the Empire. It's not like I have a choice. Chapter 920. Nick returned with the Ice Maiden's Specter core to Piercing Heaven base. He couldn't allow her to retain her body outside in case she tried to kill him. In the end, she was still a Specter, and Nick wouldn't entrust humanity to her. When they arrived in the containment unit inside Piercing Heaven base, Nick looked at the Specter core. Remember when we first met? He asked. This time, his ability worked. Over the next few hours, Nick deleted a large chunk of the Ice Maiden's memories. She forgot about the Pure One, how she grew up in the Empire, about Nick, and a big chunk of her knowledge about energies. Knowledge of energies was extremely dangerous, and Nick wanted to make sure she wasn't too dangerous. He didn't want to die alongside her. When he was done, he threw the Specter core into the middle of the containment unit. With all of her human memories deleted, the Ice Maiden had turned into a regular Specter. She didn't care about humanity anymore. She only cared about becoming stronger and surviving. Her humanity had been stripped away. Nick left Piercing Heaven base. I want to die, he said. Nurse Alice locked onto Nick. He wouldn't do it, right? He wouldn't destroy another knowledge repository, right? Oh, son, Nick said, I found another base. This one was much harder to find. The Specter in there knows a lot about pure energy and star energy. Nurse Alice gritted her teeth, a reminder of the time she had lived among humans. This time, the son only needed a couple of hours to respond. How did you find this one? The son asked. Nick once again gave a fake story. He had simply searched through the underground. Since the son had promised to reward him, he dedicated the last couple of years to finding more bases. After Nick was done, the son remained silent for several minutes. How do you know that the Specter knows a lot about energies? The son asked. Because I talked with it for a while, Nick answered. How much have you learned about energies? It asked. Barely anything, Nick said. Why not? Do you not desire knowledge? The son asked. I do desire knowledge, Nick answered, but I work for you and I am a Specter. My survival has the highest priority. If I learn too much, I will be a danger, and I can't hide anything from you. The only way to stay alive is to not know things that are too dangerous. The sun remained silent for a while. Nick acted like he wasn't worried, but deep down he was. "You did well not learning about these things," the sun said. "I can tell that you are not lying. You are a great employee. If you can find one more base, I am willing to let you become an eternal." "Thank you," Nick said. "I will resume searching shortly." "I have high hopes for you, trickster," the sun said. Then the sun's avatar vanished again. Some hours later, Nick returned to Piercing Heaven base. All the Zephyx and the machines were gone. Naturally, the Ice Maiden had also vanished without a trace. After he left Piercing Heaven base, he looked in Nurse Alice's direction. She had been looking at him the entire time. However, Nick didn't say anything. Instead, he escaped from Nurse Alice's perception and returned to the containment unit with the two shields. For the next 15 years, he worked with them. He couldn't immediately get to the next step of the plan, since finding the bases too quickly would make the sun suspicious. When the 15 years were up, Nick left the containment unit. "I want to die," he said. Nurse Alice locked onto him. Neither of them said anything. Then Nick moved to the next base. However, it wasn't Deep Core Base, where the Pure One was located. No, it was Night Sky Base, Nurse Alice's former base. As soon as Nick arrived at the base, he started to erase his traces. The entire time, he was still inside Nurse Alice's perception. After Nick left, he started to move the base toward the surface. Nurse Alice watched with narrowed eyes. This base held knowledge of her identity. At this moment, she wished that she had destroyed it. The sun could likely read through the information inside the base and quickly connect the caretaker to her. Nick wouldn't do that, right? He wanted to have her knowledge. If he killed her, she would tell the sun about him. That would kill both of them. Even if Nick deleted all information about her in Night Sky Base, the other two bases still had peak adversaries inside. It wouldn't be difficult to connect Nurse Alice's appearance with the base. Nurse Alice watched as Nick moved the base closer to the surface. Then he stopped and turned to look at the distant Nurse Alice. "Last chance," Nick said. Nurse Alice stared intensely at Nick. Several seconds of silence passed. "Fine," Nick said. Then Nick looked upward. Oh, boom. Nurse Alice arrived above the base and destroyed it in an instant. Nick looked at her with cold eyes. "You think that will save you?" he asked. "You won't do anything," Nurse Alice said. She seemed confident, but she was not confident at all. By now, she believed that Nick would kill himself just to kill her. Nick narrowed his eyes and showed a disgusted sneer. "Watch me," he said. Then he looked upward again. Oh, boom. At that moment, Nurse Alice attacked with all of her power. Countless lightning bolts, clouds of darkness, fires, distortions, quakes, and so on rained on Nick. A cloud of destruction battled with a cloud of black smoke. A portal appeared, and Nick appeared many kilometers away. Oh, boom. Nurse Alice followed him and resumed her attack. Her chances were low, but killing Nick before he could say anything was her only way out. Chapter 921. Nurse Alice couldn't allow Nick to call the sun. How could she explain her actions? She had destroyed a base. Nurse Alice kept chasing Nick and continued attacking. She used endless abilities, but Nick always managed to transform at the right moment. When she used abilities that targeted force specters, he transformed into a physical specter. When she used attacks that dealt with specters in general, he transformed into a human. It was like Nick was every category of living being, and he always had a counter. However, Nurse Alice was still more powerful than Nick, and despite the arsenal of weapons in his sanctuary, she was pushing him back. "You really think you can stop me? Give up and teach me your knowledge," Nick transmitted. Boom. Yet Nurse Alice just kept attacking without saying anything. "Fine," Nick said. Nick teleported again. This time, Nurse Alice didn't follow him. The reason was simple. Nick had teleported to a height of almost 30 kilometers. Any being that reached a height of 30 kilometers would be mercilessly killed by the sun. In a way, Nick was essentially directly beside the sun right now. "Now what?" Nick transmitted. Nurse Alice gritted her teeth. She had tried her best, but she couldn't kill Nick in time. If the sun weren't here, she would be able to kill him. "Last chance," Nick said. "Teach me, or I will call the sun and tell it that you destroyed a base." Nurse Alice didn't say anything. Every way led to death. "Why are you so against teaching me?" Nick asked. "Is your confidence in my power that low?" It's not you, Nurse Alice finally answered. It's humanity. How can I put my life in humanity's hands? Humanity can't win. Teaching you will ensure my destruction. Humanity? Nick asked. What do you think I have been doing all this time? If I can prove to you that humanity has a chance, will you finally comply? Nurse Alice remained silent. By now, Nick had already fully recovered his Zephyx, and she knew that she wouldn't be able to kill him in time. He could just teleport back to the sun. There was no way. Fine, show me your proof, Nurse Alice said. Nick's brows furrowed. Once more he had to take a risk, but it was necessary. She already knows enough to kill me. Knowing more won't change things. Even if she destroys the underground city, it won't be a big loss. This era was never supposed to succeed. The underground city exists to gather information. By now, I know how to deal with the Nightmen, and we don't need the Zephyx anymore. The next moment, Nick appeared in front of Nurse Alice. Follow me, he said. Nurse Alice just glared at Nick. The two of them traveled to the underground city. I would have never expected that I would lead Nurse Alice right to the underground city. As soon as they arrived, Nurse Alice noticed an empty space in her perception. If she didn't know something was there, she wouldn't have noticed it. Nick opened the wall, and the two of them entered. As soon as Nick opened the inner wall, Nurse Alice saw everything. Over 1,000 protectors. People living in the darkness. People who didn't use Zephyx. How was that possible? Nurse Alice had seen how the Empire had failed. For millennia, the Empire had secretly gathered its power before striking. With the addition of the Nightmare, this tactic had become impossible. Even if Nick knew everything there was to know about energy manipulation, how would that help her? Humanity needed to be powerful enough to fight the enemy. The enemy had so many contingency plans that Nick couldn't possibly deal with all of them. He needed more people. It wasn't like the enemy would launch one attack after the other in waves. No, the enemy would use everything at once. If the sun got destroyed, the enemy would look at Nick's power. If he wasn't very strong, they would send fighters to kill him. However, if they feared that he was too powerful, they would just directly launch a world-ending weapon. Alternatively, if Nick destroyed the world-ending weapon first, the sun would destroy all life on the planet. Maybe it would even destroy the entire planet. Nick couldn't be in two places at once. He would need to deal with the weapon, and humanity would need to fight for themselves. But how were they supposed to grow strong enough to resist the enemy when they couldn't accumulate any power in peace? Yet, when Nurse Alice saw the humans living in darkness and their power, she started to believe. Despite the nightmare, despite the envious researcher, despite the sun, despite the null, Nick had somehow managed to create such a powerful and technologically advanced force. This is not the true weapon, Nick said. This era is already too old. We will not gain the power necessary to strike the enemy during this era. All of this is just preparation. As soon as the next era begins, I will create a new city. Then, humanity has thousands of years of time to advance. Nurse Alice remained silent. Humanity. Right now, humanity had access to the accumulated knowledge of the enlightened ones. If she taught Nick everything there was to know about energy manipulation, the full power of the enlightened ones would be available to all humans. Nurse Alice weighed her chances. If everything went according to plan, humanity might have a greater chance of victory than she had thought. Naturally, Nurse Alice also considered destroying the city for just a moment, but she already knew there would be no point. Nick could just create a new one. As long as Nick was alive, humanity would rise again and again. And sadly, she didn't have the power to kill Nick. It was over. Her life was in Nick's hands. By now, she fully believed that Nick would actually kill himself just to take her with him. He had to. If he weren't genuinely willing to do that, he wouldn't be able to convince her, and she knew that. I will teach you, she said. Chapter 922. Finally. It took so much convincing, but Nick had finally done it. Sadly, he needed to sacrifice 2 parts of the knowledge repositories to make it happen. It hadn't been easy to convince Nurse Alice. Nick took a small machine out of the sanctuary and threw it to Nurse Alice. Nurse Alice recognized the machine. It was a simple database with a transmission interpreter. Give me 10 years, Nurse Alice said. Then Nurse Alice left without a word. Nick closed the walls of the underground city again and released a deep breath. The last piece of the puzzle has been acquired. All the tools I need are at my disposal. Now, I just need to turn my plan into reality. Only 10 years. Nick went back to the two shields and worked more with them. If he had known that he would return to them several times, he would have saved his goodbyes. Yet plans changed all the time. For the next 10 years, Nick worked with the two shields. Suddenly, a small machine appeared beside the containment unit. It was the database he had handed to Nurse Alice. Nick took a break and accessed the database. So much, he thought. The knowledge contained inside the database was more than all the other knowledge repositories combined. Even more, the amount of information regarding Zephyx manipulation is even bigger than the other two. At that moment, Nick got a suspicion. Nurse Alice knows everything about energy manipulation that the enlightened ones had acquired. Yet she continued to exist for around 20,000 more years. During that time, she probably learned even more about Zephyx manipulation. As Nick kept looking through the database, he noticed several gigantic diagrams. These diagrams were even more complex than the abilities Nick had received from the sun. Nurse Alice included her own abilities. Nurse Alice was essentially teaching Nick all the abilities she owned and more. This meant Nick now had access to knowledge about energy manipulation superior even to the enlightened ones. After looking at it for a while, Nick found a file with some simple text. It was a message from Nurse Alice. She's willing to go all in, he thought. She won't be able to help during the final battle since Earth will be covered in star energy, but she will help in any way she can. Nick took a deep breath. Then he started to study everything there was to know about energy manipulation. The amount of stuff Nick had to learn was tremendous, and the concepts were so complex that even he had issues comprehending them. Sure, he could repeat what was stated, but he didn't understand what it meant. Understanding all of this will take longer than writing it down. After looking at the database for a bit, he went to the underground city. Then he transferred the knowledge about pure energy manipulation to the archive, told Samar about it, and left. Naturally, Arya wasn't here any longer. Even more, Samar was also slowly approaching the end of her life. She had less than 100 years left. Nick was reminded of the time he had risked everything to get Samar to join him. That risk had paid off tremendously. Without her, the underground city wouldn't be where it was today. So many things could have gone wrong, but thanks to Samar and Arya, they didn't. After that, Nick went to Deep Core Base and entered the Pure One's containment unit. Since Nurse Alice was outside, one of the knowledge repositories was essentially lost. Because of that, Nick wanted the Pure One to also learn about energy manipulation. Additionally, the Pure One might be able to help Nick. Sadly, that second part didn't turn out to be true. The Pure One was even more helpless in front of these concepts than Nick. The reason was simple. The Pure One didn't have any abilities, and he lacked Nick's ability of increased intelligence. The only thing he could do was learn everything by heart and repeat it in case Nick failed and a new emperor appeared. The Pure One learned everything by heart within 10 years. Nick had also learned everything by heart, but he was also still in the process of actually understanding the concepts. Nick left the containment unit. Then he destroyed the database in his hands. As soon as that happened, Nurse Alice turned to look in Nick's direction. She couldn't perceive him right now since he was so far underground and hadn't said the sentence, but she could feel that the database had been destroyed. A determined expression appeared on Nurse Alice's face. Then she gathered a lot of Zephyx. Meanwhile, Nick waited below the ground. He was looking at his beams, specifically the one leading to Nurse Alice. The beam was completely black. But then it turned to dark red. Then to light red. In the end, it stopped at a very light red. Nurse Alice had many abilities, and one of them allowed her to manipulate her own memories. The message she had left behind told Nick that when he destroyed the database, she would return his strength. She knew how his ability worked, and she wanted to give Nick the best shot at success. After all, if Nick failed, she would also die. Nurse Alice also deleted all her knowledge about pure energy and star energy manipulation. She could have done that sooner, but she wanted to keep her options open. Since someone else had that knowledge now, she could get rid of it. The less she knew, the smaller the risk. When Nick saw the beam turning into a faint red, his strength returned to a 7-fold increase. Naturally, Nick had also dealt with the Pure One's memories to the degree that they would give him a sevenfold increase. More than sevenfold wasn't possible due to the sun. Everything has been set up. Now, I need to grow stronger and actualize my new abilities. Nick returned to the two shields to work with them. Yet, not even 10 years had passed before something happened. The Maw appeared. The champion was finally becoming a level 9 extractor. Chapter 923. Two Maws appeared below the right arm in the inferno. It was time. The champion was about to become the first level 9 extractor. I am the trickster, and I can manipulate enemies. If you need my help, just call for me, Nick transmitted to the Maws as they consumed the two shields. The Maw didn't answer, but Nick knew that it had heard what he said. As soon as Nick finished talking, one of the beams became redder, exactly why he'd said it. Now Nick knew which beam belonged to the Maw. Naturally, the Maw didn't answer since it didn't care. Nick had already suspected that the Maw lacked intelligence, and this basically confirmed it. The Maw simply acted on instinct and captured its food. In fact, a moment after the beam became redder, it turned fainter again. Everything Nick had just told it had already been forgotten. Its intelligence was too limited to retain it. The two shields vanished, and Nick was left alone in the containment unit. A moment later, Nick dismantled the containment unit and left. As soon as the champion advanced, his perception would be able to cover the entire world. From now on, Nick couldn't travel in the open anymore. Meanwhile, far away, the 8 shields found themselves in isolated rooms. The time had come. The right arm and the Inferno simply waited in the flesh room. They were not ready to advance, and they couldn't get the Maw's ability. Naturally, the other shields were in the same boat. Everyone just waited. The only one who was actually doing something was the champion. He was advancing. Several hours passed as the champion looked at the fleshy walls with determined eyes. I am going to save humanity, the champion thought. I sacrificed so much to get here. Humanity has sacrificed so much. Humanity relies on me, and the sun wants me to usher in a new age for humanity. The alien menace has to be stopped, and we must protect the sun. The sun is the only reason why humanity still exists. I might be the champion of light, but I am not the champion of humanity yet. I must first become the champion of humanity. The champion was determined. He would save humanity, no matter what it took. In the beginning, the champion had felt envious of the old champion. The old champion had built Aegis, and he had been humanity's sole protection. How could he possibly live up to that? But after several centuries, the champion finally gained confidence. Now, he didn't view the old champion as competition anymore. Instead, he saw the old champion as an ancestor. A saint. Without the old champion's power, the new champion wouldn't be where he was today. I hate that I have to put my friends in danger, the champion thought. I hate that everyone has to sacrifice so much. The champion's Zephyx synchronizer attuned to the Maw, and he felt himself growing stronger. He felt his perception improving, but the walls of the Maw still kept it in check. Eventually he stood up, his eyes filled with determination. Humanity's hope had been born. The champion of humanity had appeared. The first level 9 extractor. The first savior. And there will be many more, the champion thought. A moment later, the fleshy wall parted, revealing a complex maze of flesh. The champion walked out. The other shields also walked out. All of their perceptions were suppressed, so they blindly traversed the maze. The first people who found each other were the champion and the new left arm. As soon as they met, they nodded at each other. They did not fight. Instead, they traveled together. Within a matter of minutes, the champion met up with 5 of his shields, including the Peak Protector, who had become a shield just to trigger the Maw. Where are the other 2? The champion asked. I saw the Inferno earlier, but he just ran away before I could say anything, one of the shields said. At that moment, the Inferno in the right arm walked out from behind a wall. The two sides looked at each other. As the champion saw the 2 of them, he was surprised to find that they were mid-shields already. Instead of being weakened, they had been strengthened. Inferno, former right arm, the champion spoke in greeting. The atmosphere was awkward. Is it finally time? The Inferno asked with a snort. What's the plan? The former right arm just smiled and let the Inferno talk. I'm unsure if I can share my plan with you, the champion said. You have been under the trickster's control for centuries. I do not know which side you stand on. Nothing has changed, the Inferno said. I stand with humanity. I stand with humanity, the former right arm confirmed. The champion furrowed his brows. He was exceptionally good at telling if somebody was lying. He could see that the two shields were not nervous, and they didn't seem to be lying. Either the trickster had them under such perfect control that there wasn't even an iota of doubt in their minds, or they were still themselves. What do you consider being on humanity's side? The champion asked. Is it Aegis' side? The former right arm smiled bitterly. No, he answered. We are on humanity's side. Aegis is not on humanity's side. The other shields narrowed their eyes, and the atmosphere intensified. I see, the champion said with a sigh. Your mind has been controlled by the trickster. Just like the technician. Surprisingly, the two shields didn't immediately disagree. The trickster changed parts of our memories. It does have that power, the former right arm said. When the other shields heard that, they furrowed their brows. Usually, people being controlled by a specter vehemently denied it. But we agreed to it, the Inferno added. The atmosphere became tense. Why do you think you agreed to have your memories manipulated? The champion asked. Because he has shown us things before deleting our memories, the former right arm answered. We do not know what we have seen. Our memories are gone. However, we still remember the questions that have been answered. We do not know the answers anymore, but we know that these questions have been answered before he took our memories. The other shields had already prepared for battle. They knew that the Inferno and the former right arm were under a Specter's control. Leaving them alive would be too dangerous. Yet the champion told them to wait. And what are the questions? The champion asked. The former right arm smiled bitterly. Why does the nightmare exist? He asked. The shields furrowed their brows. Wasn't it obvious? The nightmare was a specter, and it wanted to feed on all the people in the world to grow stronger. Yet the champion's eyes shone for just a moment. He had more background information than the other shields. Why don't you tell us? The Inferno asked. Champion, why does the nightmare exist? Do you know? The champion thought about that question for a bit. Naturally, since he knew the sun was essentially protecting humanity, he knew the nightmare didn't exist without a reason. The sun had full control over the Specters, and the Specters were supposed to be a trial for humanity to overcome. The existence of the Maw and Nurse Alice was obvious. The champion could tell that they were supposed to be suppressed eventually and become humanity's strength. But the nightmare, they had no idea where the nightmare was. What is the purpose of the nightmare? The former right arm asked after not getting an answer for a while. Why did the sun create the nightmare? What does the nightmare do to humanity? What purpose is there behind it? Protection, the champion answered. If humanity advances in the wrong direction, they might make a mistake and kill the sun. That would doom all of humanity. The other shields looked at the champion. This was new. That doesn't answer the question, the Inferno said. You just gave us the answer for why the envious researcher existed. This task is being completed by the envious researcher. This has nothing to do with the nightmare. The champion furrowed his brows. The nightmare keeps people in the sun's light. That stops unforeseen developments from occurring. And why are unforeseen developments bad? The former right arm asked. We all agree that humanity has to grow more powerful. Why do we need the sun's help, permission, and supervision to grow stronger? The champion was backed into a corner. He knew the answer. Obviously, if humanity developed the wrong weapons and didn't grow biologically more powerful, it wouldn't stand a chance against the aliens. But he couldn't say that. He wasn't allowed to tell anyone that he worked for the sun. I have another question, the Inferno said. Maybe this one is easier for you to answer. The champion didn't answer. Why did the old champion always proclaim that the sun was our enemy? Why did he say that, and why are you not saying that? The Inferno asked. The champion thought about that answer. It wasn't easy to answer. As the old champion of light, he must have come into contact with the sun as well, which meant he must have known the truth about the sun. So then, why would he say that the sun was the enemy? Humanity needs a common enemy that is easy to visualize, the champion said. The sun was the right target. The Inferno and the former right arm glanced at each other. We do not remember the answer to the question, the former right arm said, but what you said feels like an assumption or a guess. There is no certainty behind it. Do you have a better answer? The champion asked. No, we don't, the Inferno answered. I have another question, the former right arm interjected. Is the nightmare supposed to be suppressed? Can we find it? The other shields weren't sure why the former right arm asked that question. No Specter is supposed to be suppressed. They were monsters that just wanted to grow stronger. However, the champion had more context. Was the nightmare supposed to be suppressed? It didn't feel like it. It was impossible to sense the nightmare, and they had no idea where it could even be. The nightmare couldn't be suppressed like this, which meant it was not supposed to be suppressed. No, the champion answered. Deep inside, he was starting to get agitated. He knew that he was on the right side, but answering these questions was so difficult. It was like he had to make things up to answer them. I got another one, the Inferno said. Why does the null exist? What's the point behind the null? Again, the shields felt the question was irrelevant. They looked at the champion and wondered why he hadn't given the obvious answer already. Why does everything have to remain secret? The Inferno asked. Why is nobody allowed to know anything about the null? What's the null's purpose? Silence. I don't know, the champion answered with furrowed brows. Why not? The right arm asked. How is anyone supposed to know? The Tinkerer asked with a roll of her eyes. That's the point of the null. Nobody is supposed to know anything about it. You are asking questions that are impossible to answer in order to sway us from our path. The trickster really did a number on you two. It's sad to see you two turn into its puppets. The champion didn't comment. I got one last question, the right arm said. After that, this conversation will be over. The champion already dreaded their questions. He didn't have a good answer for any of them, despite knowing the truth about the world. Can a demon manipulate the mind of a shield? The right arm asked. Chapter 924. Of course not, the Tinkerer said with a laugh. Even without a barrier, the demon wouldn't have enough power to influence a shield's mind. The champion looked at the fleshy ground. The right arm smiled gently. Thank you for the answer, he said. The Tinkerer just raised an eyebrow in skepticism. The next moment, the right arm looked at the Inferno and nodded. A cocky smile appeared on the Inferno, and he nodded back. Boom! The Inferno suddenly exploded forward as fire gathered all around him. The champion was pulled out of his thoughts, but a moment of distraction was all the Inferno needed. The Tinkerer immediately activated her barrier, but then she realized something horrifying. The Maw had destroyed their barriers. They had no means of defense. They could only attack. Meanwhile, the former right arm started to shine in a gentle light, and the Inferno's fire grew even stronger. He pierced forward with his spear. Boom! Everyone's eyes widened as the Inferno spear entered the Tinkerer's body. Bang! Then the Tinkerer exploded into a ball of fire. Immediately, everyone jumped back. The champion narrowed his eyes and pulled out his sword. An explosion of light occurred, and the Inferno was pushed back. What is the meaning of this? The champion shouted in rage. The Inferno grinned cockily, while the former right arm smiled peacefully. Julian Winter is our master, the former right arm said. He needs more power. If we want to save humanity, we need to make Julian stronger. Julian is humanity's savior. The champion gritted his teeth. Earlier, the two of them had talked like they'd followed the trickster voluntarily. Now they talked like people who'd been forcefully brainwashed. Was all of this just for show? Was this the trickster's plan? The champion tightly held his sword. The answers were not important. The two of them had killed the Tinkerer, which made them aegis enemies. He had no other choice. The champion's eyes turned white, and an irresistible domain of light expanded from around him. The Inferno and the former right arm just looked at the domain. They weren't even trying to evade. Did that sound familiar? The Inferno asked. The next moment, he was consumed by the champion's light. The former right arm released a peaceful chuckle as he was also enveloped. The next moment, the light vanished. The former right arm and the Inferno had vanished. The fleshy walls and floor in the surrounding 200 meters had also completely vanished, leaving an open space. This was the champion's new ability. Domain of light. This was not something any human could withstand. Silence. The champion took a deep breath. Did that sound familiar? Yes, it sounded familiar. Before the technician died, he had spoken similar words. Could a demon control a shield? No. But then what about the technician? The trickster must have had control of the technician's mind for a long time. The technician and the old left arm constantly helped him. They had been close allies for a long time. Did Julian control both of their minds? That was impossible. But then why? Why did they help him so much? Why did the technician sacrifice his life to allow the trickster to escape? Naturally, the Inferno and the former right arm knew that they couldn't possibly kill the champion. Yet they still wanted to help Nick, and the best way was to cause as much suffering as possible. That was why they had sowed doubts in everyone's minds before killing the Tinkerer. Sorrow, grief, and hatred would enter the shield's hearts, and Nick would benefit. "I'm sorry," the champion said. "I was distracted and that cost us our friend." The other shields were in different states of shock, anger, and acceptance. One of them had died, but they had already expected something like this to happen. "It was 2 against 6, the new right arm said. "Don't take responsibility for every mistake. We also didn't react in time." The other shields nodded in agreement. The sudden attack had caught all of them off guard. The champion wasn't the only one who blamed himself. "In the end, they were also just marionettes," one of the shields said. "We can't believe anything the trickster or its servants tell us. There is a reason why we gave it that name." "Don't let your confidence be shaken," the shield added, looking at the champion. "The trickster's specialty is tricking people and playing them for fools. Be stalwart and do not think about the trickster's words. Most likely, it said all of these things just to make you doubt yourself so that you won't kill it when you finally attain the power to do so." The champion didn't answer. To be truthful, his confidence was shaken. Logic told him that this was all just an elaborate ploy from the trickster to cause more suffering, so that it might grow stronger. And yet, his emotions were telling him that something didn't feel right. The champion closed his eyes and took several deep breaths. "Let's proceed with the plan," he said as he opened his eyes again. He couldn't think about these things for now. This was one of the most critical missions Aegis had ever undertaken. The others nodded and readied their weapons. "We are in this together," the champion said. "For humanity we must stand strong." Everyone nodded again. "I trust you, and I know that everyone will play their part perfectly. The plan has to be amended due to the Tinkerer's death." "Marana," the champion said as he looked at a tall woman carrying 2 guards, "you have to take the Tinkerer's part." "No issue," Marana confirmed with a nod. The next moment, the champion closed his eyes again. He moved his hand to his bare chest. Then he buried his hand in his chest. He split his skin and flesh. His hand pierced into his stomach, and he pulled something out. It was a space bag. The Maw took everything from its contestants except for their weapons. Because of that, the champion had hidden the space bag in his stomach. His body healed, and he threw the space bag to Marana. "Does everyone know what they have to do?" he asked. Everyone nodded. "Then let's begin." Chapter 925. Boom! The domain of light expanded again, enveloping all the shields. Yet the shields didn't die. Instead, the domain of light strengthened them. The champion's white eyes looked downward. Then he swung his sword. Boom! He destroyed several kilometers of flesh. At that moment, an uncountable number of tentacles came out of the surrounding walls. The Maw realized that the champion was attacking it, and it struck back. The tentacles stretched into the domain of light, but they were turned into nothingness as soon as they touched it. The champion felt his Zephyx draining. The champion had a choice. Would he ask his friends to sacrifice themselves so that he could become a savior? Or would he fight the Maw with them? He had chosen the latter. He had enough of sacrifices. He didn't want to sacrifice anyone anymore. Humanity couldn't keep growing by consuming the corpses of their innocent sacrifices. The sun had given him this power, and he would use it for the good of humanity. He was not the champion of light. He was the champion of humanity. As more tentacles appeared, the other shields started to help. They all struck the tentacles, but even with all of their powers combined, they could only deal with 60% of them. The other 40% still reached the domain of light. "Deploy the star grenades," the champion ordered. Marana immediately took out several grenades from the space bag and threw them out of the domain of light. As soon as they exited the domain of light, the champion deactivated his ability. Almost immediately, the tentacles reached the shields. Boom! The grenades exploded, covering everything in star energy. The tentacles started to turn into white dust, but the Maw immediately cut them from its body. "Ferguson down," one of them shouted. Ferguson had been one of the shields. While humans could handle some star energy, too much around them could affect their Zephyx. Because of that, while the star grenades exploded, everyone wasn't allowed to use any Zephyx. They had to isolate their bodies. Otherwise, the star energy would turn their Zephyx into star energy, which would then extend to their Zephyx synchronizer and turn that into star energy as well. Of course, between the moments when the domain of light deactivated and the star grenades exploded, they were vulnerable. Ferguson had died during that moment. The champion activated his domain of light again. Even though the Maw managed to deal with the star energy, it still lost a huge chunk of its body and Zephyx. "Continue," the champion shouted as he unleashed another strike. Boom! The strike extended further down. After breaking through almost 10 kilometers of flesh, it started to hit hard metal. It had broken through the Maw's outer shell. The champion grabbed all the other shields with telekinesis, and they didn't resist. Then he charged down. More and more tentacles attacked his domain of light, and his Zephyx was dropping rapidly. They were approaching the exit, but the champion's Zephyx was critically low. "Star grenade," Marana suddenly transmitted to everyone. Then she threw the space bag to one of the shields before rushing out of the domain of light with tens of star grenades. "I hope I won't see any of you soon," Marana said with a smirk. Everyone watched as Marana was surrounded by tentacles. Boom! Then another explosion of star energy went off, and the surroundings cleared. Marana had sacrificed herself to allow the other three to escape. The others gritted their teeth. Another shield had died. There were now only 2 shields, and the champion left. However, thanks to Marana's sacrifice, the remaining 3 managed to get out of the Maw's domain. Several shields died, but if they had just sacrificed themselves to allow the champion to advance in peace, there would be no shields left. They would only have one savior. But now they had one savior and 2 shields. As soon as they were out, they could finally see the Maw. It was a gigantic ball of flesh, eyes, and tentacles. The champion deactivated his domain of light, and his Zephyx recovered. The next moment, several Maws appeared below the 3 of them. Bang! But the champion destroyed the 3 Maws with his sword. Then more and more Maws appeared around them. The Maw wanted to pull them back into its domain. The shield who had caught the space bag retrieved more star grenades, and he threw them into the distance. Since they were no longer surrounded by the Maw, they could now detonate the star grenades from a safe distance. Boom! A gigantic crater appeared on the Maw's body. As the champion fought the Maws, he looked at how the Maw regrew. More star grenades were thrown. That was when the champion's perception picked up something. He didn't see it perfectly, but he could tell where the Specter core was based on how the Maw defended against the attacks. The champion gathered his Zephyx and swung his sword. Bang! A huge cut went through the Maw, perfectly hitting its Specter core. And yet its Specter core was not damaged in any way. The champion's control of his powers had reached incredible levels, and he could cut through the Maw's body without injuring the Specter core despite hitting it dead-on. "You saw it use the bomb," the champion commanded. The shield pulled out a huge grenade and threw it towards the Maw's left side. Boom! An incredible amount of star energy exploded, and half of the Maw's body was turned into star energy. The champion struck several times with his sword, and the Specter core was exposed again. Then the champion charged in and used his domain of light. The regrowing tentacles attacked him, but the Maw's regeneration couldn't keep up. A moment later, the domain of light enveloped the Specter core. Immediately, the Maw's body stopped moving as the connection between its body and Specter core was cut. The other shield threw several Zephyx suppressors to the champion, and the champion enveloped the Specter core in them. Silence. They had done it. They contained the Maw. So many shields had sacrificed themselves, but it had been worth it. Everyone looked with shock and triumph at the Specter core. Then they saw a small metallic spider crawling on the Specter core. "Huh? What was that?" "I wouldn't use any Zephyx if I were you," they heard in their minds. They all recognized that voice. It was the trickster. Then they looked with horror at the metallic spider. Bang! The spider released a tiny explosion, barely a couple of centimeters wide. Yet that explosion was filled with star energy. The champion watched in horror as the Specter core in his hand turned into star energy. Chapter 926. The champion looked with absolute horror at the vanishing Specter core. The Maw. It was dead. Why? Hell, they had sacrificed so much. Excluding the 2 traitors, 3 shields had died. And then they had finally done it. They managed to suppress the Maw, the Specter that had suppressed Aegis for millennia. But now it was gone. The champion could tell that the Maw had been an early Eternal, which meant this could have pushed him to become a mid-savior. Yet all of this was taken away at the last moment. The champion gritted his teeth and clenched his fists in absolute hatred. "Julian," he shouted. The other shields just watched in horror. It was gone. Their friends had sacrificed themselves for the Specter core, and now it was gone. Their sacrifices had been for nothing. They also gritted their teeth. The trickster. The fucking trickster. Meanwhile, far away from the chaos, Nick just looked towards Aegis headquarters. "The deed is done," Nick said. "You have done well, trickster," the sun's avatar told him. Naturally, Nick would not have killed the Maw if he hadn't gotten the sun's permission beforehand. Nick had been the one who had reached out to the sun first. He wanted to know if the sun wanted more suppression or less suppression. If it wanted more suppression, Nick had an idea that would help. Some days later, the sun came back to him and asked him about his idea. Nick said that the Maw was easy to trick. There were plenty of materials that could isolate its senses. Additionally, the Maw only worked on instinct and didn't have any intelligence. Since Nick already needed to deal with all of the technological progress, he could also deal with other parts of humanity. Compared to the Maw, Nick actually understood the sun and could be given complex orders. Additionally, Nick's power was also nothing to scoff at. Humanity would soon suppress the Maw and become even more powerful. Nick had expected that Aegis would attempt to suppress the Maw as soon as the champion broke through. It was risky, but this was a unique opportunity. After all, how were they going to find the Maw otherwise? Sure, the champion could see the entire planet, but the Maw had to be underground somewhere. Searching underground was difficult for humans, since the nightmare's influence grew harder to resist the deeper one descended. There would have been only one way to find the Maw. The trickster. Aegis would need to make another trade with Nick. And Nick was quite sure that Aegis saw him as a bigger threat than the Maw. They would not allow Nick to grow even more powerful. So they would attack the Maw immediately. However, this would also break the natural progression of power the sun had planned for humanity to traverse. First, they needed to suppress Nurse Alice. Then 1 or 2 more saviors would appear, while the champion became an early savior. Only then would humanity suppress the Maw. Humanity would continue to advance. When the champion became a mid-savior, and when there were 5 to 10 more saviors, the next logical step would be to suppress the nightmare or the null. Yet those 2 were never supposed to be suppressed, and there were no more Eternals. With no more achievable goals in front of them, humanity would turn their eyes to the sun. To the stars. That was when things would become dangerous for the aliens. Because of that, this would be the moment this era ended. However, since humanity suppressed the Maw this early, they would focus all their power on the champion. Only 1 to 3 more saviors would appear before the champion became a mid-savior. This was not great for Zephyx production. The next centuries were the most profitable centuries of the era, and they needed to continue for as long as possible. Naturally, Nick didn't argue in this way when talking to the sun. He asked if humanity was ready to fight the alien threat, or if the sun believed that it wasn't enough. After thinking about Nick's offer for a while, the sun decided to put him to the test. If it turned out that Nick was right, he would be allowed to kill the Maw. However, he was not allowed to kill any humans. If Aegis didn't attempt to suppress the Maw, nothing would change. In the end, Nick was proven correct, and he killed the Maw. This would extend the duration of the current era. This was in the sun's best interest. "You have proven capable, loyal, and creative," the sun's avatar spoke. Nick just nodded respectfully. Naturally, Specters didn't need to act respectfully, since there was no point in politeness between them. Yet there was also no reason to not be polite and respectful. It might not help, but it also wouldn't hurt. "You are allowed to become an Eternal," the sun spoke. "If we ever need another era, you will also be responsible for keeping humanity at a certain level of power." "I can do that," Nick said. "However, you must achieve the power of an Eternal yourself. If you are truly cut out to be an Eternal, this should not be difficult to achieve." "Of course," Nick answered. "Good," the sun spoke. "If you find any more irregularities, tell me." "I will. I wish you success, trickster." Then the sun's avatar vanished. Nick's ability reactivated, and he looked at the world. This is the best-case scenario, Nick thought. I believed that I would need to infiltrate the alien base as an adversary, which would have been incredibly risky. If I can become an Eternal before the era ends, my chances of success are much higher. Nick looked at the underground city. There were thousands of Nightmen by now, and they were growing stronger rapidly. The strongest one was already in the 6th realm, but their power couldn't compare to that of an Extractor. The advancements of the Nightmen were still crude. I should leave them a couple more centuries to grow stronger. The more data they gather, the better. Chapter 927. The amount of suffering Nick collected by killing them all was immense. While no Zephyx was released into the atmosphere since the Specter core was turned into star energy, Aegis still suffered a lot. Aegis didn't blame them all for their dead shields, they blamed Nick. He made their sacrifices almost worthless. Sadly, there was nothing they could do. Of course, the champion watched the entire world like a hawk for any sign of Nick, but it didn't do much. When it came to staying hidden, Nick was second best in the world, only the Null was better. For the next couple of years, Nick focused on learning as much as he could about Zephyx manipulation. The knowledge would allow him to create many powerful abilities. Within 5 years, Nick learned an extremely useful and powerful ability. 5 years was barely enough time to even conceptualize such a powerful ability, and that was the easiest part. This ability was easy to create, though, for one simple reason. Nurse Alice already had it, and she just wrote down the entire diagram. He copied it, and after 5 years, he'd successfully replicated one of Nurse Alice's abilities. Nick opened his eyes and looked at Samar, who was already quite old. She would probably die within the next 50 years. As Nick looked at her, he saw her Zephyx moving around her in patterns. These patterns formed manipulation lines. The lines were incredibly complex, but Nick could see them. I need to get more familiar with Zephyx manipulation, Nick thought as he saw the patterns of Samar's Zephyx. When Nurse Alice used this on me, she immediately knew what all my abilities could do. Technically, I can also see how Samar manipulates her Zephyx, but most of the manipulation lines still don't make any sense. Nick focused on one set of manipulation lines and looked at them for months. It's a shockwave, Nick thought. She can gather her Zephyx and unleash it with her weapon, creating a shockwave of Zephyx that can be remotely detonated. It had taken Nick months to understand a relatively easy ability from a protector. Meanwhile, Nurse Alice had understood all of Nick's abilities within seconds. I just need more practice. Manipulation lines are like a foreign language, and I still need to manually translate their meaning. Nick wanted to learn this ability first, since it would help him gain even more abilities by looking at humans and Specters. After Nick tried out this ability, he went to the next step of his plan. I need to make the most of the last centuries the Nightmen have. If I let them advance on their own, they won't make it far. Any advancement they make now won't have to be made during the next era. Nick went to an isolated location inside the city and sat down. The next moment his body changed. All the Zephyx from his body vanished as it retreated into his Specter core. His body started to turn into black dust, and some seconds later, only a lone Specter core remained. That was when the pure energy generator in front of Nick activated, filling the room with a burst of pure energy. Most of the pure energy was siphoned towards the Specter core. And yet, the pure energy never truly touched the Specter core. Instead, it gathered in front of Nick. Flesh grew out of the Specter core. A chest and head formed, then legs and arms. Several seconds later, a human sat in the middle of the room. He looked just like Nick. That was when Nick took a deep breath. Breathing, Nick spoke. I have to breathe again. If I don't breathe, this body will die. Nick had used his advanced disguise ability to create a body of pure energy. At this moment, his Zephyx was completely isolated in his Specter core. There was a tiny opening on the back of his neck that allowed Nick to release and gather Zephyx, but he couldn't use a lot. Usually, Extractors and Specters drew prefix into their bodies before moving it to their Zephyx synchronizers or Specter cores, but Nick only had a tiny opening. This meant he could use almost no Zephyx. If he gathered too much, a pulse of his Zephyx would break the body apart, returning him to his Specter form. Now I need to grow this body, Nick thought. Nick had created an almost identical copy of the body of a Nightman. As of this moment, Nick's body was only in the initial first realm, which was the equivalent of an initial newbie. Sadly, he couldn't create a powerful body since he needed a lot of pure energy to achieve that. With the pure energy generator, he could make a body in the third realm, but that was the limit. But Nick wanted to start at the first realm to find a way to advance for himself. He let his body grow very slowly, and while it grew, Nick experimented with the pure energy inside his human core. He cross-referenced the techniques the Nightmen had created and tried to imitate them. Thanks to Nick's high intelligence, level, and experience, he only needed a couple of minutes to perfect all of the techniques the Nightmen had created. These techniques were exceedingly simple when compared to Specter abilities. Nick lifted his right hand and snapped his fingers. Bang! A tiny flame rose from his fingers. Then he snapped his fingers again, and the flame froze. Another snap, and a ball of lightning appeared above his fingers. Manipulating pure energy is so easy, Nick thought. However, it also needs different things. I hadn't expected this, but the different elements relate to one's mindset. Creating ice is much easier when you have a cold and distant personality. Creating fire is easier when you are angry and full of energy. Depending on your personality, you would have a natural affinity for at least one of the elements. Using Specter abilities is easy and straightforward. It's like math. However, manipulating pure energy needs more than just math. It also needs feeling. There's a lot I can learn. Chapter 928. I think I should call specific talent in different elements elemental affinities. Depending on one's personality, one would have different elemental affinities. Sadly, this is not very relevant to the Nightmen. Based on their genetics, almost all of them should have elemental affinities for either darkness, ice, or metal. Darkness requires a sinister and cold mindset. Greed for power and lack of empathy make it easier to turn pure energy into darkness. Additionally, since the Nightmen share DNA with the Nightmare, they should all have some talent in darkness manipulation. Ice requires coldness and distance. While not all of them have that, a lot should have that predisposition. Metal requires controlled anger, almost like hatred. It is not as chaotic as the greed for power that a darkness affinity requires. Metal is more shaped by decisive confidence. A select few of the Nightmen might get a fire affinity, but the chances are relatively low. It requires a lot of energy and uncontrolled rage. Due to their inherent high intelligence, Nightmen learn very quickly to control their anger since actions made out of anger often end up hurting themselves more than others. An Earth affinity needs a stalwart and calm mind. It requires principles and strong beliefs. Nightmen are very pragmatic and flexible in their morals. I don't think any of them will awaken an Earth affinity. Having a water affinity is absolutely impossible for the Nightmen. It requires love and the desire to protect others. Light is the same. Light is similar to water and requires selflessness. Wind is carefree. It essentially represents doing whatever one wants. Again, Nightmen are too greedy for power and they care too much about the opinions of others. Lightning needs a balance between empathy and explosive anger. It's like it is friendly at one point, but if you anger it, it will explode with incredible force. I don't think any Nightman will awaken a lightning affinity. Darkness, ice, and metal. That's what the Nightmen will focus on primarily. Also explains why there are many techniques the Nightmen have created based on these elements. I believe, based on my personality, I would have either a metal, water, light, or earth affinity. Luckily, the concept of elemental affinities doesn't apply to me since I am working directly with the fundamentals. Others need to create parts of their techniques, but the elemental transformation is made by their feelings. The second part is basically automated. I can directly create the manipulation lines. Nick summoned one element after the other and inspected it. He had seen thousands of Specters in his life, many of whom used elements to attack. For the next couple of days, Nick created one technique after the other. One moment his body was surrounded by pure darkness, hiding him from view. The next moment, he shot a concentrated beam of light at the wall. As expected, different elements have their different strengths. Darkness excels at assassinations and staying hidden. Fire excels at wide-range destruction. In the beginning, wind and lightning excel at speed, but later, light will overtake them in that department. After some weeks, Nick's body was ready to advance to the second realm. Now, I need to come up with a good way to make use of this advancement. I need to widen the gap between someone at the peak first realm and someone at the initial second realm. There must be a decisive difference in power. Nick quickly came up with several ideas, and almost all of them would shape one's future path to power in a certain way. Jack of all trades or specialization, he thought. There are ways we can increase everything or only one aspect. However, humans only have a limited amount of time. They can't study forever. If we increase all aspects at the same time, that will only be useful if everyone trains in everything. This is not what humanity needs. If humans were solitary, working on everything would be great since that person wouldn't have any weaknesses anymore. But we are not solitary. We have teammates that protect our weaknesses, allowing us to focus on our strengths. Specialization is what humanity needs. For the next weeks, Nick experimented with different things. He advanced, broke his body down, recreated it, and advanced again. Again and again. He wanted to make sure that everything worked. Eventually, he finished his creation. Nick looked at his own human core. At this moment, his human core was covered in a network of manipulation lines. He siphoned some of his pure energy out of his human core, and it entered his body as it was. Next, he siphoned his pure energy through the network. His pure energy transformed into darkness and spread throughout his body. Then he became ethereal. The elemental converter works well, Nick thought. The network of manipulation lines on Nick's human core would automatically transform his pure energy into a dedicated element. While the process of turning pure energy into an element happened automatically in the mind, the conversion itself still consumed some pure energy. But with the elemental converter, the pure energy would directly convert into an element. This cost no additional pure energy. Additionally, the conversion was much faster and happened earlier. It was more efficient, and attacks could be launched faster. After creating elemental converters for all the elements, Nick put their designs into the archive and told Samar to spread the information. With this, Nightmen in the Second Realm could now fight Johns evenly. At least on average. The thing about working with pure energy was that one's power solely relied on oneself. It all depended on the techniques one created and how much experience one had. Extractors had set abilities, and as a baseline, an extractor's ability was more powerful. However, a John only had access to 2 powerful abilities. Meanwhile, a Nightman of the Second Realm could have 10s of them. Even more, if the Nightman was good enough at creating their own techniques, their techniques could even be stronger than the Extractor's abilities. Weak Nightmen would lose against weak Extractors, but strong Nightmen would win against strong Extractors. At least up until the Second Realm. Chapter 929. After Nick invented the elemental converters, he continued advancing in the Second Realm. He now had access to far more pure energy, which opened more ways to use it. In general, techniques were put into 2 categories: concrete and abstract. This was related to their use of pure energy. Concrete techniques required a fixed amount of energy to produce a fixed amount of destruction. For example, using arbitrary numbers, 5 points of pure energy could summon a lightning bolt that caused 15 points of destruction. This could be a devastating technique in the Second Realm, but in the Third Realm, using this technique would be a waste of time and pure energy. Meanwhile, abstract techniques worked on a percentual basis. Using 15% of one's pure energy could produce a lightning bolt that caused destruction equivalent to using 45% of one's pure energy. These techniques would grow more powerful as one advanced. When explained like this, it would seem obvious that abstract techniques were strictly superior to concrete techniques. Sadly, it wasn't that easy. Conversion of energy into destruction was an entire branch of research in regards to techniques. Concrete techniques were refined to perfection, and they were supposed to be used inside a certain realm. Meanwhile, abstract techniques needed to be flexible in their conversion. Sadly, the efficiency of the conversion would be very different at different levels of power. If the last example was used with more realistic numbers, at the best possible conversion, the abstract technique would transform 15% of pure energy into 30% of destruction. But when used with more energy, it could drop from 30% to 10%. That would make the technique a literal waste of energy. Not attacking would be better than attacking at that point. Because of that, abstract techniques needed to be further refined into different levels. In the Second Realm, one would have to learn the first level of an abstract technique, and when one reached the Third Realm, one needed to learn the second level to make it useful again. Meanwhile, concrete techniques were self-contained and easier to learn. If one just kept learning concrete techniques appropriate for their level, one wouldn't even need an abstract technique. Now the concrete techniques looked better. Yet abstract techniques had their own unique use. Abstract techniques could do more. For example, there were abstract techniques that increased one's passive usage of pure energy to enhance one's physical body. This effect couldn't be achieved by concrete techniques since their energy usage was fixed. Concrete techniques used pure energy once to unleash one effect. Abstract techniques could keep siphoning energy to keep the effect active. A powerful nightman would use 2 to 3 abstract techniques to make them faster and stronger, while unleashing a lot of concrete techniques to cause damage. Due to the passively increased speed and power of their bodies, fighting against someone who didn't use these abstract techniques would feel like fighting someone of a lower realm. Both kinds of techniques had their uses. Nick studied the techniques that had already been created, and he focused on the one that increased one's physical body the most. This technique was very similar to Nick's primary ability. The only difference was that this technique used energy to achieve that effect, while Nick's primary ability used nothing. Additionally, Nick's primary ability had a much higher increase in power. Nick managed to improve the technique by leaps and bounds in just a couple of hours. He increased its efficiency significantly, while also improving the power multiplier. When Nick used this technique, his physical power increased threefold, while his passive energy consumption also tripled. This was not that bad. His pure energy regeneration would just suffer a bit. He still recovered more pure energy than he was using while this technique was active, but it would just be quite a bit slower. That was a good exchange for a threefold increase in power. However, there was an issue. The technique was extremely complex. Nick didn't have issues using it, but he believed only 5th realm or 6th realm nightmen could use this technique after practicing it for several years. Yet the energy conversion was designed for someone in the 2nd realm. If someone in the 5th realm used this technique as it was, their energy consumption would increase by over 40 times to triple their physical power. The person would run out of pure energy very quickly. It's still worth studying, Nick thought as he published the technique in the archive. Over the next months, Nick created about 60 more abstract techniques for nightmen in the 2nd realm. There was no lack of concrete techniques, which was why Nick focused on abstract techniques. After creating enough techniques, Nick focused on his advancement into the 3rd realm. This advancement should not be too hard. It is simply Zephyx but for nightmen. Achieving Zephyx is a bit bothersome. I should focus on making it easier. After a couple of weeks of trial and error, Nick created an easy way for nightmen to achieve their version of Zephyx. Funnily enough, it required knowledge of all 4 knowledge repositories. It was a pill. When consuming the pill, the body would discharge all non-essential organic matter from the body. The digestive system, lungs, blood vessels, and heart would die and leave the body. Nightman's Zephyx didn't need all of that since the network for pure energy was already covering the entire body. After all, Nick had designed the body to be this way. The pill would get rid of these unnecessary parts and create a big open space. This open space could be used in further advancements to add more things that improved one's pure energy storage, manipulation, and recovery. Achieving such an effect with a mere pill required an insane amount of knowledge in human biology. A machine that could create this pill needed to be insanely advanced. The effect it had on the person's pure energy was significant, and one had to know a lot about pure energy to make this pill work. Lastly, actually achieving this effect required complex manipulation of pure energy. This pill was incredibly powerful and easy to use, but conceptualizing and creating it required unreasonably high levels of advancement in almost all fields of study. Luckily, Nick had all of that. Chapter 930. Nick created several machines that could produce the pills and published their effects and the process of their creation in the archive. Then Nick consumed the pill. He had already tried it several times to test it, but this time, he would actually advance. After consuming the pill, Nick had to wait for a couple of minutes. His body started to feel numb. This was a necessary process, since it numbed the pain one would feel. Over the next hours, Nick's body started to vibrate and shake. His heart and lungs were being denatured, and the waste was transported by the energy pathways to the intestines. Then the esophagus collapsed into the stomach. The stomach shriveled up and collapsed into the intestines. After that, the intestines started to roll into a ball as they weakened. Any remaining nutrients would be harvested by the remaining intestines, leaving only black sludge behind. Some hours later, Nick felt a pressure in his abdomen. This was the signal that the body was ready to expel everything. Nick strained his abdomen, and with his power, he compressed the weak remains into a long tube. Finally, the black tube was discharged via the anus. An hour later, the energy package the pill delivered was used up, and the body desired oxygen again. Nick started to feel lightheaded. Not enough oxygen was reaching his brain. A moment later, his body lost consciousness. Of course, Nick's actual perception came from his Specter core, which meant that he actually didn't lose consciousness. It was just his human brain that didn't work anymore. While the body was unconscious, it would enter survival mode. It would desperately search for any kind of energy, and it found plenty in the energy pathways. It accessed these pathways, and Nick's body regained consciousness. The Zephyx was complete. With Zephyx achieved, Nick's skin started to pull in much more pure energy and directly injected it into the energy pathways. This was much easier than having to starve for several days. Finally, Nick reached the third realm. Since he now had more access to pure energy, he started to create more techniques. He created several concrete and abstract techniques for all affinities and published them. Nick remained at this level for 5 years. The energy conversion and manipulation became more complex, but he still managed to create over 100 techniques in these 5 years. If someone can master just 10 of these, they would be able to win against any extractor who's at an equal energy level. By now, Nick was already at the peak of the third realm. Bodies needed time to grow stronger. Needing only 5 years to go through the entire third realm was already very fast. Extractors needed decades for that. However, Nightmen shouldn't advance as soon as they can. If Nightmen want to keep up with Extractors, they have to master and create many techniques. If they just skip to the next realm, they will be missing the fundamentals of energy manipulation. Learning how to efficiently manipulate little bits of energy helps in learning how to efficiently manipulate big amounts of energy. The path of a Nightman requires a lot more studying. Extractors have it easier since their abilities are fixed already. Nightmen need to study far more, but practical experience is also important. They need to actually test their techniques in proper battles. When I create the new city during the new era, I also need to consider that. I have all of these techniques, but during a battle, I wouldn't be sure which one I should use. There's too much choice, and I don't have an inherent instinct for which technique is the right one to use. Sure, my mind is fast enough that I can look through all the techniques before the enemy hasn't even moved a millimeter. But if I had the mind of someone at the peak of the third realm, this could cost me my life. Next, Nick had to come up with a way to improve the advancement to the fourth realm. Extractors use shells to further improve their Zephyx regeneration. Nightmen don't need that. Their own Zephyx is much more efficient, and it can support them for the entire fourth realm without issues. After some thinking, Nick came up with a good idea. For several months, he experimented. It only took him a single year to come up with the perfect way to advance. A lot of pure energy gathered in Nick's body. Then, in the place where his left lung had been, the pure energy turned into a spherical bone. Yet there were complex inscriptions on the bone. The inscriptions were for an advanced abstract technique. More energy pathways formed, and they surrounded the bone, feeding it an incredible amount of pure energy. The inside of the bone was hollow, but it quickly filled up with pure energy. When the saturation of pure energy reached a certain level, the bone started to shine. The abstract technique inscribed on the bone was activated. This should be the biggest increase in power any Nightman has ever experienced. The spherical bone could keep one abstract technique active with only minimal cost. The cost was only a quarter of what it would need to activate the technique without such a bone. This bone would allow a Nightman to choose one abstract technique that would be active at all given times for a small price. At this moment, Nick's body was 3 times as powerful as it should be. He didn't recover pure energy very quickly, but the abstract technique was active at all given moments, and he didn't even need to focus on it. Sadly, this requires a change in how abstract techniques are developed. The development of successive levels of abstract techniques needs to be additive. It is easy to add manipulation lines, but very difficult to remove them. But we also shouldn't discard the other form of abstract techniques, they are still useful. I think a third kind of technique should be introduced, a kind of abstract technique that's designed to be used for these kinds of bones. An internal technique seems like a fitting name. Internal techniques have to be abstract techniques that develop additively. And I think the bone should be called energy bone. Chapter 931. Additionally, the formation of an energy bone takes about 10 years with optimal usage of energy. This gives the Nightmen much more time to research techniques and to learn the internal technique they will be using in the future. For the next 10 years, Nick focused on creating different internal techniques. For now, it was more important to give the Nightmen different ways to advance. Any knowledge and experience they gathered in this era would save years in the next era. Yes, Nick had to become an Eternal before the era ended, but there were still a couple of centuries left. Nick created about 50 internal techniques. Everyone should be able to find a fitting internal technique. For now, Nick left the creation of abstract and concrete techniques to the Nightmen. Internal techniques were much more difficult to create since they needed to be usable up to the 9th realm. How could a Nightman in the 5th realm know how an internal technique would have to be to work in the 7th realm? After the 10 years were up, Nick was ready to advance again. The 5th realm should be the last one I should take a look at. Starting from the 5th realm, developing new things will take decades, and that can wait for the next era. The passive energy regeneration of the Nightmen is still good up to the peak of the 4th realm, but with the addition of the energy bone, it reaches its limit. My focus for the advancement should be to boost energy regeneration as much as possible. Nick looked at the different Nightmen. They all wore rings on their fingers. These rings were their star energy and pure energy generators. Without them, they would run out of pure energy and die. As it was, Earth was essentially an alien planet to Nightmen. They couldn't survive with just their biology due to all of the prefix in the atmosphere. In space, they could absorb star energy with their skin and use some of the Zephyx they stored to create pure energy. Powerful extractors could survive on Earth without food, but the same thing wasn't exactly true for Nightmen. Yes, they didn't need food, but they needed pure energy, which needed Zephyx. In a foreign world, every biological life form probably had some form of Zephyx stored in their bodies, which they would use to create their own pure energy. If the Nightmen lived in such a world, they would need to regularly consume other life forms to refill their Zephyx. Sadly, these life forms didn't exist here. The Nightmen needed extractors to create Zephyx, just like how knights in the olden times required farmers to grow their food. I'm sure that the alien life forms working with pure energy advance on a purely biological basis, but that doesn't mean that's the best way. The ancient ones only use technology. The aliens only use biology. Why not combine the strengths of both paths? For the next 10 years, Nick developed the perfect advancement for the 5th realm. When he was done, he looked at the fist-sized machine in his hands. This thing was incredibly complex, but it also had incredible power. Nick siphoned a huge amount of pure energy out of the several generators around him and used everything to strengthen his human core. His human core became several times harder. When it was finished hardening, it had attained a level of hardness that allowed it to compress pure energy to twice its former density. This increased the maximum amount of pure energy one could store at a time. Next, Nick opened his chest and placed the machine in the spot where his heart had been. The machine connected to his internal Zephyx storage and his human core. Almost immediately, all the Zephyx of Nick's storage was emptied and pushed into the machine. The machine transformed the Zephyx into pure energy at incredible speeds and shoved it into the human core. When the human core was full, the machine stopped pumping out more pure energy, and Nick's Zephyx storage refilled with the Zephyx he produced. The machine was a potent pure energy generator. It was many times stronger than the pure energy generator the Nightmen wore on their fingers. With the pure energy generator, the Nightmen's speed of energy recovery would be equivalent to the speed of energy recovery an initial protector would have. Yet they were only at the 5th realm. Biology can only absorb so much energy at once. If it absorbs too much, the pathways will collapse. But metal doesn't have that problem. The speed of their energy recovery can keep up with all of their demands. The bottleneck is now the amount of Zephyx they can store at any given moment. And we can increase that severalfold by creating a wearable Zephyx storage. Nick did some math and simulations in his head. It's terrifying, he realized. With all of these things, Nightmen at the initial fifth realm could fight peak specialists evenly. Of course, they would need to know a lot of techniques, but it's definitely possible. The fusion of biology and technology can produce incredible power. I also already have ideas about the next advancement, but I can't spend my time on that yet. I've been here for around 30 years, and I can't afford to spend more time on this for now. I need to become an eternal. Nick published all his findings in the archive and planned his next steps. The Nightmen would deliver plenty of data to Nick within the next centuries, and he would use that data to come up with further advancements in the future. Now, he had to focus on becoming an eternal. As he looked at the city and saw the thousands of protectors, Nick decided to make use of them. It needed an incredible amount of suffering to become an eternal. Protectors were not shields, but there were many of them. Thousands of protectors would equate to tens of initial shields. Nick couldn't use the underground city to advance all the way, but he could supplement his advancement. And he would do just that. Chapter 932. Why did you want to meet me, Chancellor? A man with white hair asked. The man looked stalwart and seemed to be relatively young, but that didn't say a lot. Almost everyone looked relatively young when they were protectors. Samar, who was already pretty old by this point, looked at the man in front of her with an evaluating gaze. The man felt a bit nervous when the Chancellor looked at him this way. Meetings with the Chancellor were rare, and most of the time they were not good news. Let me get right to the point, Samar said. Do you want to be the new Chancellor? She asked. The man's eyes widened. He had not expected that. Is that a joke? He asked. I'm not joking, Samar answered. The man took a deep breath. Why me? He asked. You are still relatively young, and the other protectors trust your judgment. You only lead one squad, but the other squad leaders have nothing but good to say about you. You seem to be the right choice. The man looked at Samar with uncertainty. Sure, he was a squad leader, but that was it. He was subservient to a captain, who was subservient to the general. There were much better options. I'm not sure, the man said. Giovanni, I'm not making this decision lightly, Samar said. I've watched you for a long time, and I believe you are the right candidate. You know that I don't have much time left. At most, 20 years. I need to find a successor, and you are my first candidate. Giovanni looked at the table with uncertainty. Becoming the Chancellor was a lot of responsibility. He wasn't sure if he could do it. It's not like I'm going to throw you into the cold water, Samar said. You will be watching me for the next couple of years, and I will teach you all that is necessary. Giovanni took a deep breath. I think there are better options. I'm still too inexperienced, he answered. There are no better options, Samar said evenly. That's why I asked for you. Giovanni felt uncomfortable. Sure, he wanted to become a captain, but he hadn't even thought about becoming a chancellor. That was so much responsibility. I don't feel cut out for the job, Giovanni said. It's such a big jump. Samar took a deep breath in annoyance. As always, Nick had been right. Nick said that Giovanni would refuse. He was confident in his power and in his capabilities to lead a team, but he had never led more than a team. Because of that, he lacked confidence when it came to running an entire city. He wanted to gain experience slowly, and with experience came confidence. You have been chosen, Samar said. Giovanni just looked at Samar. That was a weird way of phrasing it. Not by me, Samar said. You were one of my candidates, but you wouldn't have been my first candidate. I don't follow, Giovanni said. The next moment the door opened, and a tall, blond man entered. Giovanni could feel unending power coming from this man, but he didn't recognize him. Giovanni knew almost all of the protectors, and he could recognize every single one of them. But he had never seen this person before. You've been chosen by him, Samar said as she stood up from her chair. The blond man walked past Samar without saying a word and sat down in Samar's chair. The symbolism was clear. The man was in charge, not Samar. Giovanni looked at the man with confusion and shock. Nice to meet you, Giovanni, the blond man said with a friendly smile. You may call me the Guardian. Guardian? Giovanni asked. He is the true ruler of the city, Samar said. Giovanni looked at Samar in shock. He built our world. He is the one who brings all the Specters. He is the one who fills the archive with new knowledge, Samar explained. Giovanni's mind almost stopped working. He is the only one who is allowed to leave our city and enter the outside world, and that won't change, Samar said. Giovanni looked at the blond man with shock and confusion. I want you to be the new chancellor, Nick, the blond man said. Giovanni couldn't answer yet. This was just too much to take in. Nobody knew where all of the Specters or the information in the archive came from. But now these secrets had been unveiled to him. Giovanni said, I'm not ready. You are, Nick answered. I know you are. Giovanni said again, not finishing his sentence. This is not a permanent choice, Nick said. I believe you are the right person and I think you should give it a try. If you fail to live up to my expectations, I will simply choose another candidate. You won't be able to ruin the city with a wrong call. Samar and I are still here. Even if you make a mistake, we will tell you why it was a mistake, and I'm sure you will learn. Failing isn't bad. Failing is part of life, and every failure teaches us something. Even if you turn out to not be cut out for the position, this will still be a learning opportunity for you. Don't you agree? Giovanni looked at Nick. A lot of the pressure had been taken off his shoulders. Right, he didn't need to be perfect. He still had people he could ask for advice. He still had people who would tell him if they believed he was about to make a mistake. As long as these people still existed, he couldn't cause too much damage with a wrong call. I need some time to think about it, Giovanni said. Can I go? Sure, Nick said, but please keep my existence secret. Of course, Giovanni answered. Then he quickly exited the room. Nick's peaceful aura vanished after Giovanni left, replaced with an emotionless expression. Do you think he will accept? Samar asked. He already has accepted, Nick answered evenly. He just hasn't realized it yet. Chapter 933. Naturally, Giovanni accepted the position. Nick had spoken just the right words to convince him, but that was to be expected. Nick could read Giovanni's mind after all, and he knew exactly what he thought. For the next 5 years, Giovanni was Samar's aide and simply enforced her commands. Of course, Samar also explained what she was doing and why she was doing it, and Giovanni learned a lot. When the 5 years were up, a major policy change happened in the city. Zephyx production had to be ramped up significantly to keep up with the future rise of the Nightmen. Because of that, all the Protectors had to work with the most powerful Specter in the city. Some of the Protectors had seen the Specter before. The city rarely worked with this Specter, but when it was necessary, they did just that. Over 1,000 Protectors entered the gigantic containment unit. In the middle of the containment unit was the Specter, an unmoving piece of flesh. It radiated incredible power. The Protectors knew that if the Specter decided to attack them, all of them would be helpless in front of it. That was why the city rarely worked with it. While the Specter couldn't escape its containment unit, anyone inside the containment unit was helpless. However, if they strengthened it too much, it might gain the power to break out of the containment unit. It was dangerous to work with this Specter for exactly this reason. But the city needed Zephyx. Naturally, this Specter was Nick. A couple of weeks ago, he had told Samar basically everything about himself, since she had still been under the impression that he was human. Unveiling his true identity was no longer an issue since Samar would die in about 15 years anyway. The relationship between Nick and Samar had not changed in any way despite the revelation. The only thing it did was to calm Samar's worries about the unknown Specter. Nick could already kill everyone, and he'd had that power for centuries. If he wanted them dead, they would already all be dead. And yet the people lived in relative happiness. Samar still remembered her distant past of living in Crimson City. Compared to Crimson City, living here was much better for the people. Over 1,000 Protectors gathered in the containment unit. The door closed and the prefix was pulled out. The Protectors collapsed and lay weakly on the ground in agony. 10% of the gathered Zephyx would be harvested by the containment unit, and the remainder would go directly to Nick. For a week, the Protectors just laid weakly on the ground. Then the doors opened, and they were allowed to leave. The reactions were mixed. Some of the Extractors felt terrible and hated working with this Specter. But other Extractors were excited because they could finally grow more powerful. There were so few fallen in the city that advancing became almost impossible. By working with this Specter, they could finally become stronger. When the 1,000 Protectors left the containment unit, they walked past another 1,000 Protectors. 49% of the Protectors would work for 1 week. Then another 49% worked the next week. The remaining 2% were left in the city to keep it running. 1 week of work, 1 week of relative free time. This would be the cycle for the next years. As soon as the doors opened, the tremendous suffering Nick had accumulated turned into Zephyx. This is even faster than working with the two shields, Nick thought. If I only used this, I would advance a level within just a couple of decades. Sadly, I can't just advance without causing suffering in the real world. That would be too suspicious. It's expected that Specters have some secret sources of suffering, but these secret sources can't be too good. While Nick was harvesting the suffering from thousands of protectors, he was also focusing on creating some new abilities. These abilities would be useful in the future. One wave of protectors after the other entered and left the containment units while Nick was creating new abilities. After around 15 years, Samar died. Now, there were fewer than 20 people left who had seen the outside world before, and all of them were aging protectors. Within the next 50 years, nobody would be left who had ever seen the outside world. As the new chancellor, Giovanni gave the order to stop working with the Specter. The Zephyx they had harvested was more than enough, and he hadn't been the biggest fan of Samar's decision to work with the Specter. Naturally, Nick didn't mind. He had already expected something like that to happen. He needed to cause some chaos anyway. I'm about 60% of my way to becoming a late adversary, Nick thought. As long as I harvest the remaining 40% in a noticeable manner, there shouldn't be an issue. Nick left the city and looked at his beams. There were hundreds of thousands of light red beams pointing at him. These beams represented the people who knew about the trickster. By now, the world's population had increased drastically. There were probably over 50 million people alive right now, but the only ones who knew about the trickster were extractors. As for black beams, there were none. And blue beams, one. There was only a single one, and that one came from Giovanni. With Samar's death, there was nobody left who knew of Nick Dusk. The name of Nick Dusk had essentially vanished. Its only existence was in the form of an old database entry of a failed program regarding a new position. Not even the Pure One remembered Nick's true name, and his past since they had agreed to delete a big portion of the Pure One's memories for Nick's primary ability. Nick Dusk was gone. Nick Dusk no longer existed. My true identity has been expunged from the world. In the future, the trickster will also vanish. But for now, I still need this identity. Chapter 934. The number of shields had increased quite a bit within the last few years. Since the Maw was no longer an issue, Aegis didn't need to suppress their number of shields anymore. Their own advancement of the consumption had happened centuries ago, and Aegis now also had over 1,000 protectors. A couple of them had been peak protectors, and as soon as the Maw had died, they had advanced. Now Aegis had over 20 shields. Humanity had essentially won. No wild Specter, except for the Eternals, could possibly thrive with so many powerful extractors around. Specters were no longer a horrible menace that haunted all cities. Now they were valuable resources. One of the new shields, a young woman by the name of Mathilda, traveled from the southern continent to the desolate continent. The desolate continent still had its name, but the name no longer fit. Over 1 million humans were already living in several cities on the desolate continent. Nature had also returned somewhat. While the number of animals was still low, plants were starting to spread across the entire continent. As Mathilda flew over the ocean to get to her new post, she didn't notice that she wasn't alone anymore. I don't have the luxury of morals anymore, Nick thought as he watched Mathilda. I only have a couple of centuries left, and I need to become an Eternal before the era resets. As soon as the era resets, I won't have any way to become an Eternal since there will be no strong extractors. I'm sorry, but this is for humanity. As a shield, you swore to give your life to humanity anyway. Nick didn't feel good about what he was about to do, but beggars couldn't be choosers. He needed the suffering. It was already risky to infiltrate the alien base as a mere Eternal, but it gave him a chance at least. Mathilda casually flew across the ocean. Bang! Suddenly something hit her barrier, and it collapsed in a single moment. She couldn't even react before darkness swallowed her. Her mind was in chaos as it ran out of Zephyx. At the same time, Nick's ability deactivated. The champion could see the entire planet, and while he couldn't perceive Nick when he wanted to stay hidden, Nick couldn't keep such a strong attack secret. The champion's perception immediately locked onto Nick, and while he didn't recognize the appearance of the Specter, he knew that it had to be the trickster. Boom! The champion charged out of Aegis headquarters at full speed. As Nick saw the champion's speed, he had to take a deep breath. This guy was traveling at almost 10,000 kilometers per second. He would be here in less than 2 seconds. The champion was even more powerful than Nick had anticipated. However, Nick had been prepared for that. He grabbed the shield, who was covered in a cloud of darkness, and pulled her into the ocean. The next moment, several gigantic beams of light appeared above the ocean and fired right at Nick. Nick hid himself behind the body, and the beams missed him. When the charging champion saw that, his eyes narrowed and he gritted his teeth. Then more beams appeared in the air and shot directly at Nick and the body. Nick vanished for just a moment, and his ability reactivated. By now, the champion had reached Nick's range of perception. Next, Nick used the majority of his Zephyx to create a momentary illusion for the champion. It looked like Nick was charging downward with the body when, in reality, he was creating a portal. More beams of light appeared, and they all missed Nick. The illusion vanished, and the champion saw the closing portal. Nevertheless, he arrived on top of the ocean and unleashed a devastating slash. Boom! Tens of kilometers of ground and ocean were turned into nothingness, triggering a humongous earthquake and several tsunamis across the world. Yet the champion only looked downward with narrowed eyes. Right now, his perception was trying to find Nick across the world, but he couldn't. He waited several seconds, nothing. And sadly, he couldn't find Mathilda either. Bang! The champion charged away again. Some seconds later, Nick reappeared in the humongous hole the champion had created. He flew to a big stone and pressed on it. This was a containment unit for Eternals. When Nick saw the cracks in the containment unit, he had to take a deep breath. The champion didn't directly target the containment unit, but it still took immense damage. This containment unit was made of the most advanced materials Nick could create, and it could stay hidden in someone's perception, just like the underground city. If the champion hadn't seen the portal close, he might have believed that Nick was still there and would have searched in the crater for him. Most likely, he would have found the hidden containment unit. Nick pulled Mathilda out of the containment unit and pocketed it. Then he pulled Mathilda down into the dark underground. Deep underground, Nick used his control over the nightmare's influence to cause a state of delirium in Mathilda's mind. After that, Nick removed Mathilda's skull cap to access her brain. His Zephyx entered her brain, using his memory manipulation ability. With Nick's incredible knowledge of anatomy, he could quickly find the right neurons to manipulate. For a couple of minutes, Nick rearranged Mathilda's neurons, essentially changing her memories. After changing her memories, Nick pulled her to the containment unit the other two shields had been in several decades ago. Mathilda woke up and looked at Nick. "Did I lose consciousness?" she asked. "Yes, but that's normal," Nick said. "Sorry, it won't happen again," she said. "It's fine," Nick said. "I'm ready to continue working, Master," Mathilda said with conviction. "Good," Nick said, "but we can't continue yet. I need to get one of your disciple brothers." "Oh, of course, I will wait, Master," Mathilda said with a smile. Nick nodded and vanished from the containment unit. One shield wasn't enough. Chapter 935. Aegis database gave an alarm just minutes after the incident with the trickster. The champion and the tinkerer's replacement ran right into the room containing their new and improved database. The tinkerer's replacement, a man with black hair, looked at the database as the champion looked over his shoulders. "It's gone," the shield shouted. The champion narrowed his eyes and gently pushed the shield to the side. Then he started typing away on the database himself. Within the last centuries, the champion had become amazing at managing Aegis technologies. After typing away on the console, the champion gritted his teeth. It was gone. Every top-secret file had been deleted. How did the trickster do it? The champion was growing more and more frustrated with the trickster. "You," the champion shouted at the shield. "You're the trickster. You deleted everything just now." The shield's eyes widened. "What? How? You literally looked over my shoulder and watched me." The champion pulled out his sword. "I didn't do nothing wrong," the shield shouted. When the champion heard that, he calmed down somewhat. "Okay, I believe you," the champion said. The shield sighed in relief. Naturally, this strange phrase wasn't just random. This was the top-secret phrase to identify themselves as Shields of Aegis. Only the shields knew of this phrase, and they were only allowed to use it when one of their colleagues was about to kill them. If the shield hadn't said that phrase, the champion would have killed him. "How did the trickster do it?" he asked. "Well, the transponder on our barriers." The shield started to say several complex words that almost nobody could understand since it dealt with very advanced technology. Yet the champion understood everything the shield said. "That's one possibility," the champion answered with a nod. "Are there more?" "Maybe," the shield answered. "I'm not sure, though. I would need a while to think about it." The champion nodded again. "Do that. I want a full report of every potential weakness." "Affirmative," the shield said. "I will do that in the secret lab." The champion just nodded before leaving the room. The shield kept looking at the database, lost in thought. Then he sighed in stress. One more fuck-up. Why was the trickster so hard to deal with? After some minutes, the shield went back to the research and development department. He searched through the machines until he found a portable flexinator. He grabbed it and walked out of the research and development department. "Why are you not putting that in your space bag?" the champion asked via voice transmission. "It has star energy in it," the shield answered, not stopping. From his office, the champion looked at the shield in suspicion. Something didn't sit right with him. He kept watching as the shield left Aegis headquarters. The shield traveled to the south and stopped above a random mountain. This was where the secret lab was. When the champion saw the shield typing in the long secret code, his suspicions lowered. Only the champion and the shield knew this code. The shield entered the secret lab, and the door closed. The secret lab was made of materials that isolated perceptions, and the champion couldn't look inside. For some reason, the champion became suspicious, and he arrived on top of the secret lab within a second. He rapidly typed in the secret code and entered. But when he saw the secret lab, his eyes widened in horror. Everything was destroyed. Even more, the shield was nowhere to be seen. That was when the champion realized that the shield had been the trickster. But how? How did the trickster know the secret phrase? How did the trickster know about the secret lab? How did the trickster know the secret code? The flexinator, the champion realized. I knew it was suspicious that he didn't put the flexinator in his space bag. Yes, it is star energy, but the chances of that leaking out are low. He kept Michael's body in the flexinator. Sadly, that still didn't explain how the trickster knew about all of these things. The trickster must have attained an ability to read minds, the champion realized. This makes things much more difficult. In truth, there were places inside the research and development department that were outside of the champion's perception. They did some research with isolating materials, and when Michael entered one of these, Nick replaced him after reading his memories. He got the flexinator into the location and put the corpse inside. Naturally, it hadn't been easy to keep all of this secret since the champion always watched like a hawk. Luckily, Nick had already created several excuses. Ironically enough, the stronger Nick became, the harder it became to infiltrate Aegis. Fooling the champion became harder and harder, and Nick had to take more risks. If the champion had attacked him, he would be dead right now. Our current safety measurements are no longer enough, the champion thought. We need to gather and come up with countermeasures before things go out of control. The champion raced back to Aegis headquarters and called for an emergency assembly. The shields all traveled to Aegis headquarters. Boom! An explosion occurred around one of the shields, and the champion immediately raced over. Boom! That was when another explosion occurred near another shield, who was thousands of kilometers away. Boom, boom, boom. 3 more explosions occurred, and everyone fell into a panic. The champion tried to find the cause. That was when he noticed a portal closing near one of the shields, who was on the other side of the world. The only thing the champion could do was to grit his teeth. That shield was already gone. He wouldn't arrive in time. 3 shields. 3 shields had vanished within an hour. Assemble, the champion transmitted to everyone. The remaining shields gathered successfully. And then they waited and planned. They couldn't allow the trickster to take more of them. Meanwhile, Nick arrived inside the containment unit with the 3 shields. In the past, Nick wouldn't have been able to use his portal ability to escape from the champion. After all, he could only place portals in places he could perceive, and the champion could perceive everything that Nick could perceive. However, with Nick's new ability, that was no longer the case. He took inspiration from envy and created his own ability to create perception drones. He had put one of the drones in this buried containment unit. Nick could find the containment unit, but the champion couldn't. Like this, Nick always had a way to retreat. Sadly, transporting the bodies wasn't easy since they couldn't travel through the portal as long as they were still alive. Nick had to be creative to transport them. Luckily, Nick didn't lack creativity. After manipulating the memories of the shields, he looked at them. One mid-shield, one early shield, one initial shield. This should be enough for now. Chapter 936, Dominant Species. Nick immediately went to work. He didn't want to manipulate the shield's minds, but he didn't really have the luxury of morals right now. He needed the power to free humanity. The three shields fanatically worked with Nick due to their altered memories. In their minds, they believed that Nick would save humanity, which wasn't inaccurate. From time to time, Nick left the containment unit to check up on the underground city's development. He knew that Giovanni was the right man for the job, but he had to make sure regardless. Giovanni's way of governing the city was different from Samar's way, but it was just as effective. But that was to be expected. Nick had a choice of thousands of protectors. At least one of them was bound to be a good leader. Sadly, working with the three shields wasn't as efficient as working with thousands of protectors, but it was still good enough. Years passed. After around 55 years, Nick took a look at the world again. This was a special occasion, although Nick didn't really care about it. This year, Nick officially reached 1,000 years of age. 1,000 years. Nick would have never imagined that he would get this old. And yet here he was. As for the world, it was developing as expected. Specters were basically a thing of the past. The cities had developed devices that could sense Specter Zephyx, and they had cleared out almost all of the hatchlings around them. By now, even mid-newbies could travel through the outside world. A normal person was not yet safe enough in the outside world since there were still a couple of hatchlings left, but a mid-newbie could defend themselves. As for Aegis, their number of shields had increased even more, and they were working on creating another savior. But that wasn't easy. They needed an Eternal to make another savior, and the only Eternal they could capture was Nurse Alice. While the champion was definitely powerful enough to fight her, Nurse Alice was incredibly fast and could teleport all over the world. The champion had already tried chasing after her several times, but her Zephyx regenerated faster than she was using it. Using the shields to attack her was also difficult. She had already killed 3 of them when they had tried to follow her. What the champion needed were 2 or 3 more peak shields. Peak shields were only 1 level below Nurse Alice, and they could defend themselves. They might not be able to win, but they could stall for long enough for the champion to arrive. Sure, the champion could attack from all over the world, but these distant attacks didn't have a lot of power when compared to his sword. Because of these reasons, Nurse Alice was still operating normally. However, Aegis just needed to wait. Their shields were growing stronger, and within a couple of centuries, they would be powerful enough to suppress Nurse Alice. Since Specters in general were no longer an issue, most cities started to develop devices of convenience and entertainment. There was more money to go around, and people could finally spend it on non-essentials. After looking at the world, Nick returned to the 3 shields to continue working with them. A century passed. Almost all hatchlings were contained. Due to the abundance of hatchlings, the city started to kill the ones that were difficult to work with. This created new hatchlings, and from time to time, there were ones that even a normal person could work with. By now, the cities had gigantic complexes stretching out of the city walls just for hatchling containment. Normal people could pay to work with them for a small price, and they could become newbies themselves. Naturally, being a newbie no longer qualified people to become real extractors. It just made normal people healthier and stronger. In order to become a real extractor, one needed to prove one's willpower and work with several demanding specters. Another criterion for becoming an extractor was to become a peak newbie. If both criteria were fulfilled, one could take part in a test to become an extractor, and if one excelled at their work, they would get the job. There were very, very few open positions. After all, there were almost no wild specters anymore, and every manufacturer was working at capacity. The only 2 times the manufacturers needed new extractors was when an old one died, or when one of their many hatchlings became an adolescent. The world had changed a lot. Humanity was the dominant race again. Sure, the Nightmare and Nurse Alice were still there, but humanity could live with them quite well. As long as they didn't go into the dark or joked about suicide, life was normal. The Zephyx production has changed, Nick thought. Centuries ago, the aliens produced most of their Zephyx via the Nightmare, the Maw, and the war between Specters and Extractors. Now the Nightmare barely produces anything anymore. The Maw is dead, and there is no more war. The vast majority of production now comes from the shields advancing, and from the protectors who want to become shields. In fact, I'm sure that the aliens are producing more Zephyx than before. One shield is worth more than 10 million normal humans in terms of Zephyx production. Humanity is in a mad dash for power, and the aliens are reaping the rewards. For the aliens, it didn't make a difference if a Specter was contained or not. He just believed that all the Zephyx that was generated was being intercepted by the containment unit, but that wasn't true. About 50% of the Zephyx simply vanished without Aegis ever noticing. It was like a hidden tax. The enlightened ones had noticed that fact very late, since the mechanism through which the Zephyx vanished was so complex and advanced. I don't know how much time I have left, Nick thought. I need to advance faster. Chapter 937. Since the shields were working with a mid-adversary, the initial shield quickly advanced to become an early shield. The early shield still needed a bit more time to advance, but they were on their way to becoming a mid-shield. Nick kept diligently working with them. Another century passed. During that century, the early shield became a mid-shield. Now Nick was working with 2 mid-shields and 1 early shield. The underground city was developing well. Giovanni asked for more fallen, but it was impossible for Nick to get more. Sadly, the demons couldn't become fallen. The reason was the sun. The sun oversaw the advancement of any demon, fallen, or adversary. Technically, the sun could infer the underground city's existence based on Zephyx generation. The underground city did not interfere with the hidden Zephyx tax at all, which meant 50% of the city's Zephyx production went to the aliens. This sounded like an unnecessary risk, but Nick believed that it was necessary. The enlightened ones only realized very late that there was a hidden tax on Zephyx. Their plans of fighting the sun went well, but in the end, the sun found them early. I believe the enlightened ones interfered with the hidden tax, and that's how the sun noticed. Most likely, the Zephyx generation wasn't developing as well as they had hoped. Maybe it even fell when the enlightened ones found out. This made the aliens investigate, and they found the discrepancies. For them, this planet is all about profit. They want as much Zephyx as possible. As long as the profits keep coming, they are happy. Technically, if they were to trace all the Zephyx to its origin, they would find that something like 1% to 5% of Zephyx comes from an unknown place. But why would they? It's only 1% to 5%. That's not enough to create several mid, late, or peak saviors that can threaten them. But if the Zephyx production suddenly falls by 5%, they might want to investigate where the 5% went to, and they will look at past data, which will uncover the underground city. Sometimes, paying taxes was the best way to protect a shady business that the ones in control didn't want. I do not know how the aliens think, but I am sure of one thing. They are greedy. Being greedy is a necessary part of becoming so powerful. Without the drive to accumulate more and more power, a civilization can't advance to such a level. Additionally, if they were not greedy, they would have already destroyed Earth when the enlightened ones resisted. The fact that we are still alive is proof of their greed. Another century passed. Finally, Nick became a late adversary. After becoming a late adversary, Nick took a look at the world again. There were over 40 shields, and 3 of them were already late shields. Aegis is advancing too quickly. If I keep going like this, I need 500 years to become a peak adversary. By then, they will have Nurse Alice already contained, and they will be creating more and more saviors. That's when the era will reset. I have to change the dynamics. I need to slow their progression or speed up my progression. Nick made a decision. He traveled to one of the shields and inspected them from a distance. He looked at them for several weeks, analyzing their manipulation lines through the Zephyx they gave off. I knew it, Nick thought after he was done analyzing the shield. The champion knows that I'm the biggest threat, and he wants to deal with me as quickly as possible. He knows that I have no choice but to capture more shields if I want to keep up with his power. That's why he probably told all the shields to create an ability that allows them to be tracked. One of the abilities Nick found would give off a certain kind of Zephyx, which was unlike normal Zephyx. With a locating ability or a device, this Zephyx could be traced. This would lead the champion right to the place where Nick contained the other shields. Even if the champion failed to kill Nick, he could deal with Nick's food. As long as the champion advanced faster than Nick, at some point, Nick wouldn't be able to escape anymore. It was an arms race. Seems like I have to unveil some of my abilities, he thought. Nick wasn't willing to unveil his abilities since that would give the champion more information, which might lead to his death. But he was out of options. Nick was certain that the champion was ready for Nick. If Nick took another shield, the champion most likely had a way to follow him or kill him from a distance. Nick could use his tricks only once. After he used them once, the champion would know how to deal with them in the future. Infiltrating Aegis headquarters as a shield most likely also wouldn't work. The champion now knew that Nick could read minds, and his way of telling if somebody was a shield most likely didn't involve the memories of the shield anymore. If Nick became reckless and infiltrated Aegis headquarters again, he would most likely die. By now, Nick could see why the son had chosen the champion. He keeps training and working on himself. He is also very intelligent. I can use my abilities only once. After that, the champion already knows how to counter them. I only have a limited number of useful abilities, and I need to make them all count. Nick tried to think of a plan. It was no longer easy for him to capture shields. However, since Nick was willing to expose one more ability, he quickly found a way to get more shields. But then, this ability won't work anymore on Aegis. I need to get enough shields to support me all the way to becoming an Eternal. It won't be easy, and it will take a while, but it should be possible. Chapter 938. The champion overlooked the planet. He knew that the trickster had to make his move at some point. The trickster was the biggest threat to humanity that currently existed. Even though the sun hadn't named the trickster as one of the trials humanity had to overcome, he definitely was the biggest trial humanity was facing right now. They had dealt with all of the other Specters except for the Eternals, and the trickster was still causing issues. Even more, the damage he was causing Aegis could be compared to death when it had still been free. At some point you will attack one of my shields again. I know that, the champion thought. 3 shields isn't enough for you, you need more. And when that happens, you will die. The shields across the planet mostly stayed in one place, but from time to time, they moved locations. The shields were Aegis leaders, and it was their duty to command it. Because of that, the champion couldn't tell them to stay put. They needed freedom to command effectively. Even more, the trickster hadn't struck in several centuries. Keeping all the shields suppressed for centuries would cause Aegis tremendous damage. In fact, doing so might make the trickster grow even faster than if he'd simply caught 1 or 2 shields. The trickster's impact on Aegis had to be minimized as much as possible. They had to treat him as another Eternal. The shield still couldn't joke about suicide, go into the dark without protection, go more than 30 kilometers up in the air, or try to gain information about the null. The Eternals had rules that even Aegis had to follow, and now the same was true for the trickster. They couldn't feel too bad about things the trickster was doing. Sadly, emotions couldn't really be controlled. If something bad happened, the people would feel bad about that, and there was nothing they could do about it. So the next best thing was to just treat him as if he didn't exist, and if he attacked, they would do their best to kill him. The trap was set. Every shield had incorporated an ability that would passively give off a special kind of Zephyx, which could be traced by several devices, and the champion. The trickster might be able to read memories, but that wouldn't help him a lot. Sure, he would know about the special ability, but he wouldn't be able to change it. It was possible that the trickster might be able to manipulate the ability, but he would need to attack the shield to do that. Every time the trickster infiltrated Aegis, he intercepted some agent, protector, or shield to gain their identity. This meant the trickster most likely needed physical contact to read memories or to control someone's mind. Every manipulation was preceded by a physical display of control, noticeable enough that the champion watched all the shields closely at all times. The shields moved from place to place, and the champion kept watch. He'd been doing so for centuries. This time, he would kill the trickster. Then something happened. A dark cloud appeared around one of the shields. The champion immediately shot out of Aegis headquarters. At the same time, Several beams of light appeared around the dark cloud and shot right through it. Everything in the surroundings was annihilated, including the black cloud and the shield. As the champion appeared on top of the place where the shield had been, he looked down. He used one of his self-created ability to search for the shield's special Zephyx. Yet he didn't find anything. That was because he had accidentally killed the shield. The champion had struck to kill, but he didn't intend to kill. The reason was that he wanted to seem like he was actually trying to kill the trickster. If he only half-heartedly attacked, the trickster might realize that something was wrong and abort the mission. Because of that, the champion struck with his full power, believing that the trickster would find some way to evade his attack and take the shield. And yet the trickster had failed. The champion became suspicious, but he didn't have any time to think about that. Boom! Bombs containing disruptive star energy exploded in all strongholds at the same time. The bombs didn't kill any humans, and they were not powerful enough to destroy any containment units. But that was not what they targeted anyway. Over half of the strongholds started to collapse after the bombs exploded. These bombs did not have much power, but the star energy they gave off disrupted the Zephyx inside materials infused with Zephyx. Specters, extractors, structures, and the containment units were extremely heavy, and when all the Zephyx was taken out of the walls of the strongholds, they collapsed under their own weight. Containment units fell through the floor. Walls collapsed. Machines broke. Even more, the bombs also had disruptive effects on someone's perception. It was difficult to perceive anything in there due to all of the violent energies moving around. However, the champion's perception was only interrupted for a single second. After that, it immediately recovered, and the champion could see what had happened. He saw many different members of Aegis charging out of the debris and inspecting the containment units. If these containment units broke, things would turn really bad really quickly. Yet all of the containment units were still in one piece. None of the Specters broke out. When the champion saw what happened, he gritted his teeth. Yes, they had lost the portion of their strongholds which had been built with Zephyx materials, but that was not the bad part. The bad part was that none of the shields stationed there could be found. They were all gone. 8 shields. Gone. Even worse, this included the shields from the strongholds that survived the explosion. Luckily, these shields couldn't vanish as quickly as the other ones, since they needed to leave through the doors. This allowed the champion to see what had happened. Apparently, as soon as the explosion occurred, the shields all charged out of their strongholds, destroyed or not. And then, they charged right into the ground. Chapter 939. Of course, the champion didn't just stand there and watch. He charged to the closest shield he could see. His light exploded around him, and he illuminated the underground as he reached the shield in an instant. Bang! The champion destroyed the shield's barrier with a controlled strike, grabbed the unconscious body, and charged to the next shield. The champion was so fast that he managed to retrieve a second shield. Sadly, he was too late for the other 6. The other 6 could have gone anywhere by now. Several other shields gathered around the champion, asking him what had happened. The trickster struck again, the champion spoke. The next moment, the champion activated his secret ability to sense the special Zephyx. He could feel the presence of all the other shields. The champion gritted his teeth. But he couldn't sense the presence of the missing ones or the ones he carried with him. The champion's mind went wild as he thought about the meaning of all of this. He had kept watch over the shields and was certain he'd have noticed if any of them had been attacked, certain the trickster couldn't strike them in secret. That meant the trickster also couldn't read their memories, manipulate them, or manipulate their abilities. This only left one explanation. The shields had forgotten the ability. Or more precisely, they had eradicated the ability themselves. They got rid of it. But how? And why? The champion pulled the 2 unconscious shields to Aegis. The other shields followed, since the trickster had shown in the past that he very often struck a second time shortly after the first assault. For now, all the shields had to stay in the champion's vicinity. The champion entered one of the containment units with the unconscious shields and 3 other shields. As soon as they were inside, the champion woke the unconscious shields. Where am I?" one of them asked. The other shield seemed just as confused. "You are in a containment unit at headquarters," the champion spoke coldly. "You have been manipulated by a Specter." "A Specter?" one of them asked in shock. Then his brows furrowed. Usually, a human would immediately deny that they had been manipulated. After all, they had memories. They knew that they hadn't done anything. Yet these were shields, and they knew how Specter manipulation worked. If they had been manipulated, their memories were most likely fabricated. "What did I do?" one of them asked. "You tried to flee into the ground," the champion spoke. "The trickster," the other shield asked. The champion nodded. "I tried to flee into the ground," the first shield asked. "You were not the only ones," one of the accompanying shields said. "6 others did the same thing. We didn't manage to retrieve them in time." The 2 shields took deep breaths in shock. At that moment, the champion's eyes subtly narrowed. The champion's perception was incredibly powerful, and he'd always had a very good intuition for spotting lies. Due to their control over their bodies, shields were extremely good liars, but they were not actors. A powerful person could unleash a devastatingly powerful punch, but if they didn't know how to punch properly, it wouldn't be nearly as strong as it could be. The same was true for these shields. Their baseline for a good lie was very high, but they weren't experienced liars. Meanwhile, the champion's baseline was even higher, and he was lying almost every day. So when he saw the 2 shields taking deep breaths in shock, his instincts alarmed him. His instincts told him that this was not genuine. They were not shocked. They just acted like they were shocked. "Do you remember anything?" the champion asked. "No," the first shield said, looking at the other shield in confusion. "No," the other shield said, glancing back. The champion looked at the 2 of them. This explanation has been pre-planned, he thought. They are looking at each other to reassure each other and to make sure that the other one is following the script. "What is your opinion of the trickster?" the champion asked. "He is our enemy," the first shield immediately answered, while the second one nodded. It was a normal and expected phrase. If a normal human said that, nobody would bat an eye. However, these were shields. Shields very rarely worded themselves inaccurately. Their minds could construct thousands of sentences in the time it took to speak one, which was why they essentially had an entire metaphorical hour to construct one sentence just right. "Our enemy," the champion thought, "not humanity's enemy." "Do you believe the trickster is humanity's enemy?" the champion asked. "Of course," one of the shields shouted. "He causes immense suffering all over the world and keeps abducting our comrades." Slight increase in volume and tension, imperceptible to normal humans but very noticeable to me, the champion thought. "What happened to the tracer ability?" the champion asked. "The tracer ability?" one of the shields asked. The next moment, the eyes of the 2 of them widened in shock. "It's gone," the second one shouted. "How did it vanish?" Another lie, the champion thought. Is it truly gone? At that point, the champion thought back to the last couple of years. He didn't pay attention to all of the conversations that the shields had, but sometimes he listened in. The champion's memory was astoundingly vast and accurate, and he tried to find the differences between these shields and the ones who were still sane. After some seconds, the champion found a common pattern. There were a couple of protectors who had talked to all of them in the past years. The champion searched for the protectors and found them all. Except one. One of them couldn't be found anywhere. He had been on his way to a different stronghold when all of this happened. And while the champion had been looking at the shields in the stronghold, the protector had just vanished. Exactly at the moment, the champion hadn't been paying attention. Then the champion tried to remember what that protector had said to the shields. Chapter 940. "Yeah, I made some progress with Zephyx manipulation recently," a blue-haired man said with a proud smile. "Oh," the shield in front of him said. The man nodded and remained silent for a bit. After that, the blue-haired man, a peak protector, went into details relating to Zephyx manipulation. The shield listened with interest. "Huh?" he asked suddenly. "The 3rd triangular lines," the protector said. "You know which ones I mean." "Yes, of course," the shield answered. As the protector continued explaining, the shield interjected with confused sounds from time to time. These sounds were not out of the ordinary since they always happened during very complex parts of the explanation. However, as the champion remembered these conversations, he realized that something was suspicious. They are not asking about anything specific, he thought. If they didn't understand parts of the explanation, they would ask more pointed questions. Instead, they just give off confused sounds. The champion immediately realized what was going on. There are 2 conversations at the same time. One of them is held verbally, while the other one is held via voice transmission. The champion overlooked the entire world at all given times, but his focus was limited. He had the power to listen in on voice transmissions with his power, but there were so many of them happening at any given moment. He had been overlooking the world for centuries, and he had to prioritize what he paid attention to. A random conversation about Zephyx manipulation between a shield and a peak protector was not on the priority list. After some time, the conversation became more animated. The shield started to ask more pointed questions and showed genuine interest in the topic. By that point, the manipulation has already taken place, the champion thought. The long explanation in the beginning took up about 3 minutes, and that's all the trickster needed to manipulate the shields. What a terrifying ability. With just a short conversation, the trickster can turn shields into loyal servants. But how did he know about the tracer ability? Did they tell him? The tracer ability also works as a perceptive ability on their end. The shields can trace basic Zephyx with that ability. They do not know that it also gives off a special kind of Zephyx that makes them traceable. The Zephyx manipulation lines are as complex as I can make them, and I'm certain none of the shields can decipher the true purpose of this ability. This means the trickster couldn't have found out the true purpose just by talking to them. After all, they also don't know about it. Additionally, the fact that he opened with a conversation about Zephyx manipulation is also suspicious. I don't know how, but he found out about the tracer ability before he talked to any of them. At that point, a long-dead Specter appeared in the champion's mind. Envy also had the ability to decipher the abilities of Extractors, but Envy needed to physically look at the Extractor's Zephyx synchronizer to do so. Can the trickster decipher abilities just by looking at an Extractor? But how would that even be possible? There's no doubt that the trickster is very knowledgeable about Zephyx manipulation, but deciphering someone's abilities just by looking at them is like trying to understand how a sewage treatment plant works just by looking at the water that comes out at the end. There are multiple ways to achieve an effect, and just looking at the result isn't enough to find out which way was used. But then the champion thought about Nurse Alice. Nurse Alice somehow knows all of my abilities as well. I've kept several abilities secret so that I can suppress her, but she was always prepared for them. Did Nurse Alice teach the trickster that ability? The trickster is beyond intelligent, but I don't think he has the capabilities to create such an advanced ability. In the future, he might be able to, but it's just too soon. But why would Nurse Alice help him? The champion thought about that question for a while, but he couldn't come up with an answer. Nurse Alice was a Specter, and there was nothing the trickster could do that Nurse Alice couldn't. Specters didn't just share such important knowledge for free. The only thing that would make that possible is if the trickster can threaten Nurse Alice's life, but that's impossible. I can kill the trickster if I just get a chance. I can't kill Nurse Alice since she is too fast. Nurse Alice is stronger and faster than the trickster. There is no way that he can threaten her life. Is it the sun? Does the sun want to make the trickster an eternal? But then, wouldn't it be the sun who gave him this ability? It doesn't make any sense. Humanity already overcame almost all of our shackles. This era is a success. Technology is progressing at an acceptable pace. The sun said so itself. Humans are growing stronger. We finally have a shot at breaking out and stopping the alien invasion that the sun is preparing us for. Why would the sun need another eternal? I also suspected that the sun gave its blessing for the trickster to kill them all. Otherwise, the trickster wouldn't exist anymore. Why? It makes no sense. That was when the champion remembered the questions the former right arm and the Inferno had asked him. He hadn't been able to answer most of them, but that was to be expected. After all, they asked questions with unknowable answers. The two of them also acted very differently from other servants, and their show of obedience at the end seems almost forcefully fake. The questions the two shields had asked the champion appeared in his head again and again. Why did the old champion want to kill the sun? Could a demon manipulate a shield? Why did the null exist? What happens now? One of the two shields in front of the champion asked. The champion didn't listen. He had just remembered something. Chapter 941. The champion told everyone, aside from the two manipulated shields, to leave the containment unit. Then the champion excused himself. After that, the champion went to his office and looked at the database. Their database had been damaged many times by the trickster, and almost all of the old data was gone. But that wasn't so bad. Their new database was far better and had far more information. The champion typed something into the search console and got thousands of hits. Then he started to read every single page of every result. The amount of useless knowledge he accumulated by doing that was astounding. None of this fits, he thought. I'm grasping at straws here, but I have to try everything. Next, the champion walked to an isolated room that barely anyone used. Inside the room, he saw a huge device. This was their old database. The first one. The one that had been encrypted. The champion took a deep breath and started to type away. Centuries had passed since that database had been encrypted, and humanity had made a lot of progress during these centuries. Over the next months, the champion built several machines. His technological experience had long since outclassed the dead tinkerer and technician. Additionally, they had access to a bit of pure energy. Could there be a way for pure energy to decrypt the old database? For several years, the champion worked on the database. Nothing of note happened in the outside world during that time. The trickster wouldn't strike again. It would be stupid to strike again, since that would be an unnecessary risk. And regarding Nurse Alice, the champion had to wait for several shields to advance anyway. After 10 full years, the champion looked at the old database. He had done it. He had decrypted the old database. Everyone else would consider this to be a wasted effort. After all, their new database had hundreds of times more knowledge than the old one, and all the technological achievements of the old database had long since been replicated and enhanced. As the champion typed in the word again, he got far fewer hits this time. Nevertheless, the champion read through all of the entries. What was the word the champion typed in? As the champion read through the entries, he remembered something. The old left arm. Shortly before she died, she had transmitted something to the technician. Take care of Nick. The champion had been busy fighting death during that time, and he hadn't paid the phrase any mind. The reason why he was thinking about it now was the left arm's connection with the technician. Had the left arm also been controlled by the trickster? The chances were incredibly low. Even more, she had given her life for Aegis. There was no doubt that she was loyal. Yet the champion also remembered that time the left arm had been nervous when the champion had been talking to Julian Winter. Back then, in his naivety, he had thought that there might be a romantic relationship between the two. But would the left arm truly be interested in a random demon romantically? The chances of Julian Winter being able to manipulate the left arm were extremely slim. The left arm had been terrifyingly intelligent and shrewd. That could only mean one thing. She had been his ally willingly. Could a demon control the mind of a shield? The champion remembered the question. The answer was clear. No. But then what about the technician? Did he also follow Julian Winter willingly? But why? The phrase the champion had typed into the database was just one word. Nick. There were many Nicks all over the world. As the champion looked through the old database entries, he came across a peculiar entry. Liaison program. I do not remember such a program, the champion thought as he read through it. That was when he saw why the entry had been highlighted. The first and only candidate for the liaison program was Nick Dusk. The champion immediately became suspicious. Why? Because there was no specific entry for anyone named Nick Dusk. One would think that the only liaison in existence would have an entry dedicated to them. But no, there was no entry. This was the only mention of Nick Dusk in the entire database. The champion accessed the new database and typed in Nick Dusk. No result. The liaison program also wasn't mentioned anywhere. Dusk, the old concept of the sun vanishing from the sky, the champion thought. Why did the old champion say the sun was the enemy? As the champion thought about these questions, he read up on Crimson City. After all, that was where the liaison program was held. Ghosty, the champion thought as he saw a familiar name. I remember him. He was one of the researchers that got killed by a Specter. Then the champion read up on all the cases of vanished researchers. There were not many. There were a couple of individuals that vanished, but mostly, they vanished in groups. Even more, all of them specialized in the same things. Then the champion remembered all the elixirs. The technician used to research the new formula for the elixir. Did he truly need that many? Materials also vanished, but it has been expertly hidden. Ghosty worked closely with the technician. What if he didn't die? Next, the champion read about what the liaison did in Crimson City. One of his first orders was to confiscate the Fiend of Darkness. Then the Fiend of Darkness was sold to a city. People, researchers, elixirs, materials. It's almost like he is trying to build a military base. Or a city. Why does he need so many researchers, and why is he doing it in secret? Even more, why were the technician and the left arm helping him? Both of them valued humanity above their lives, yet the technician sacrificed his life for the trickster. Julian Winter was also their project. Nick Dusk liaison Julian Winter. Why would the left arm even take the risk of creating something like the liaison? If it succeeded, the champion's power would weaken. She would never do that, unless the champion ordered her to. The champion narrowed his eyes. Did Julian Winter know the old champion? Is Nick Dusk Julian Winter? But Nick Dusk was a human, and Julian Winter is a Specter. A crazy idea formed in the champion's mind. Chapter 942. A crazy idea formed in the champion's mind. The left arm and the technician followed him willingly. They were even willing to sacrifice their lives for him. For a Specter, the technician might believe that a Specter could be on humanity's side, but the left arm would have never believed that. She was too suspicious and shrewd. She knew that entrusting humanity to a Specter would end badly. And yet she did just that. But what if she didn't entrust humanity to a Specter? What if she entrusted it to a human who became a Specter? But how would something like that even be possible? A human's consciousness resides in their brain, while a Specter's consciousness resides in its Specter core. The consciousness would need to transfer from the brain to the Specter core. How would that even work? I need to investigate more. The champion extended his perception across the world and looked at the containment unit that housed the Fiend of Darkness that had been sold in the past. A typical physical Specter, the champion thought. Naturally, containment units were supposed to isolate perceptions, but the containment unit in which the Fiend of Darkness resided was designed for demons. The champion was a savior. The containment unit couldn't stop his powerful perception. I am the champion of light, the ruler of Aegis and humanity, the champion transmitted to the Fiend of Darkness. The Fiend of Darkness looked around, searching for the person who had contacted it. Yet it couldn't find anything. Are you capable of speech? The champion asked. I am, the Fiend of Darkness said. The next moment, a powerful beam of light manifested inside the containment unit. The Fiend of Darkness could feel the apocalyptic power within that beam of light. What do you want? The Fiend of Darkness asked. You will tell me about every city you have resided in and about everyone you have worked with. If you lie or refuse to answer, I will kill you. Humanity will not miss a mid-demon. I will comply, the Fiend of Darkness said. After that, the Fiend of Darkness talked about its past for hours on end. It had worked with so many different people over the past 1,000 years. When the Fiend of Darkness was done talking, the champion narrowed his eyes. Have you ever heard about Crimson City or Crimson Fungus City? He asked. No, the Fiend of Darkness answered. Have you heard about Blitz, Arya Light, Ghosty, or Nick Dusk? No. Specters were great at lying, but the champion was even better. The champion felt like the Specter was honest. Additionally, there was no reason for it to lie. Do not tell anyone that I talked to you, the champion said. Otherwise, I will kill you. I won't, the Fiend of Darkness answered. Then the champion's perception retreated again. This is most likely not the real Fiend of Darkness. They exchanged it. Next, the champion checked who transported the Fiend of Darkness to the first city it was sold to. The ID of the transporter seemed normal, but only on the surface. Almost no history of accessing any network. An agent would go from stronghold to stronghold and from city to city. And yet, it seems like this agent joined Aegis just days before transporting the Fiend of Darkness. As the champion looked at the transport mission itself, he also noticed something peculiar. The mission was made by the left arm. After that, the champion looked at the database entry of the Fiend of Darkness. The database entry perfectly fit the sold Specter. Edited by the left arm, the champion thought as his eyes narrowed. The champion tried to access the old versions of the article, but there were none. Why is the Fiend of Darkness so valuable? Why did they take this risk just to get it? With Julian's power and intellect, he could have captured any fanatic or demon. Why go to such lengths for the fiend of darkness? Nick Dusk. A very grand and ominous name, also highly unusual. Barely any people know of the concept of dusk. The left arm wouldn't have created the liaison program without the old champion's consent. But by that point, the champion was already weak. Waking him for anything other than death attacking the headquarters would be foolish. Yet the left arm must have thought that it was necessary to wake the old champion. What was so important that the left arm woke the old champion? Even more, what made the champion decide to create the liaison program, and why wasn't it expanded on? It's like the champion woke up, gave a useless order, and the order failed. Why only one person? Why not try it with several people in different cities? Unless the person themselves is the most important part. But why Nick Dusk? Did Nick Dusk meet the old champion? Did Nick Dusk find something so important that the left arm woke the champion? When the sun chose me, it said that the old champion was past its prime and that it needed a stronger, younger champion. Yet I've seen how extractors are in the twilight of their lives. Yes, their Zephyx regeneration is much slower, but they can still move around without any issues. The champion I saw back then was weak and unconscious. That is not how old extractors usually act. The champion was old. For his entire life, he said that the sun was the enemy. If the sun truly stole his power, why so late? If the sun being labeled as the enemy were the reason, this would have happened much sooner. The old champion must have done something that made the sun furious. The champion furrowed his brows. Theoretically, since I have the sun's power, I could isolate the sun's perception. Did the old champion do that? But why? He must have known that this would kill him and put everyone else at risk as well. He wouldn't have done so if it weren't for humanity's sake. Then the champion remembered how he had come to power. The shields all acted normal, but some of them, notably the knife in the wall, couldn't hide their hatred towards the new champion. I thought they were just angry because I essentially killed the old champion. But what if that's not the case? What if they viewed me as the enemy because of what the old champion told them? Chapter 943. The champion sat on his throne. He had been reading through the old database for a long time in search of answers. And in the end, he got them. Simon Francium, a random protector stationed in the desolate continent. Yet he had made several trips to Crimson City because of envy. Simon just gave normal mission reports, but they said a lot. Amnesia. Envy wants something in Crimson City at all cost. Nick Dusk. The unexplained destruction of Anatomy's headquarters. Mere moments after Anatomy was destroyed, Simon Francium went back to his post before leaving for Aegis headquarters. The liaison program was established almost immediately after. Nick Dusk became the liaison, and the program launched in Crimson City. Based on the reports, the liaison program was a tremendous success. Zephyx output increased, happiness increased. But then it was suddenly halted. The program should have continued, but it didn't. The champion looked at the list of expert trainees. Nick Dusk can't be found in these lists, but there are several records that have been broken shortly after the liaison program ended. The champion also looked at the entry about the consumption in general. It stated that experiments on consuming a peak elder had been inconclusive. It should be physically impossible, yet they say that it's inconclusive. Edited by the technician. This time, the champion could restore the unedited files. It says that absorbing a peak elder has not been tried since it was judged to be impossible. But in the newer version, it says inconclusive. After that, the champion looked at the technician's research notes from that time. Shortly after the edit, he added a lot of entries about Specter abilities and how Specters worked in general. Then, some years later, he stopped adding anything about Specters. That's also where Nick Dusk's traces end. The champion narrowed his eyes. And Julian Winter's traces begin. Julian, the champion thought as he looked at Simon Francium's mission reports. There was a Specter called Julian that Simon killed. Julian acted as the CEO of Dark Dream. Conveniently, there's no mention of the CZA. But Julian didn't make Dark Dream, it took over. Since this entry was solely about the Specter named Julian, Dark Dream was only a footnote. However, the champion had found something in a peculiar place. When he had looked through Crimson City, he had found the Melfian family's own history texts. That was when the champion stumbled upon mentions of Winter Melfian, the one who had actually created Dark Dream. And his CZE. Nick, a boy from the Dregs. He has amnesia. He was 16 when Winter made him a CZE. Amnesia, uneducated, successfully passed Ghosty's lab's exam but didn't get hired. Someone named Albert helped them, an old researcher. Nick Dusk. A name change. Nick was still the CZE under Julian's leadership. Winter Melfian must have been his friend or benefactor. Nick must have felt very grateful towards Winter. But something happened. Winter Melfian died mysteriously, and Nick gave Dark Dream to Julian. It sounds like Julian had Nick under control, but what if he didn't? Julian Winter Melfian. Nick Dusk Julian Winter. This is too specific to be a coincidence. Nick became a CZE, and he allowed Dark Dream to become powerful. Then, Crimson Fungus City turned into Crimson City after the Crimson Sea incident. Winter died shortly after. Nick worked under Julian, and Dark Dream became even more powerful. When the anatomy incident happened, Simon Francium found out that Julian was a Specter. He should have killed Nick as well, since Nick must have known that Julian was a Specter. But he didn't. Vernon Melfian, the progenitor of the Melfian family, also died mysteriously during the incident. Arya Light became the governor when Nick Dusk became the liaison. Arya Light was Cujoblitz's CZE, and Cujoblitz owned the Fiend of Darkness. Anatomy's building had to be completely dark since everyone had been turned into minions, making them immune to the nightmare. How could anyone sneak in there and plant all of these bombs? For that matter, how could anyone sneak into Aegis headquarters several times? Nick or Nick Dusk excels at staying hidden. Envy was very interested in Nick. Nick had an ability that Envy desperately wanted. Nick's primary ability had to be related to an adversary or an eternal. I know all of the adversaries, and none of them fit the description. Yet there is an eternal that fits the description. The Null. Amnesia. The Null is not intelligent. There have been cases in which someone managed to synchronize with the Null, and every single one of them had amnesia. But that's not enough to warrant waking the old champion. Nick must have found something earth-shattering, something that could allow Aegis to win against the Specters. The Fiend of Darkness. The champion narrowed his eyes. The sun sees everything. But does it actually? The champion remembered one of the questions the two shields had thrown at him. Why does the nightmare exist? The most logical explanation would be to force people into the light. But why? Is it because the sun can't see anything that its light doesn't touch? A hidden city or base. Humans can't live there because of the nightmare, unless they are unaffected by the nightmare. Can the Fiend of Darkness give people access to the nightmare? Is everyone in the hidden base attuned to the nightmare? Julian Winter's knowledge of technology is far beyond our level. He couldn't have achieved that on his own. But if he had a dedicated team of researchers behind his back. That was when the champion remembered the time they had exchanged 1,000 demons. He said he would destroy all of them, but can we be sure that he did? What if he only destroyed half of them? In that case, he would have 500 demons for his hidden base. Humans. Humans who are immune to the nightmare. And there are a lot of them. If he needs that many demons, there must be thousands of heroes. The champion leaned back on his throne. The picture became clear. Nick Dusk was Julian Winter. He could access the nightmare. And he had an entire city of powerful and highly advanced humans under him. Why? It's not for food. There are easier ways to gain food. The answer was clear. A secret resistance. They want to kill the sun. Chapter 944. Nick was working with 9 shields at the same time. Yet he wasn't focused on them. He was focused on the beams coming out of his body. They had been changing color in recent years. Several light, red beams became a bit darker. He knew that this represented the shields learning more about his abilities, but that was to be expected. However, one beam in particular caused Nick worry, the one leading to the champion. It was fluctuating almost constantly. Sometimes it went light blue before turning light red again. Then it became a pure red. It was not dark red yet, but its redness was similar to the sun's redness. Sometimes it became even darker red than the sun's beam. The most worrying part was that it sometimes became blue. This could only happen if the champion suspected Nick of being human, which made no sense. Is he testing me? Does he want to lure me out? In the end, the beam settled on a relatively dark red. It was even redder than the sun's beam. He knows too much, Nick thought. I expected the champion's beam to become redder, but not that red. There are no beams that are as red as the champion's. This means nobody could have told him about me. There must be records that I have overlooked. The old database. Possible, but there's no reason to keep it or decrypt it. That's just wasted time. The memories of the shields that managed to escape also shouldn't have any clues. I don't know what exactly the champion knows about me, but it's not a good sign. Compared to the old champion, the new champion is a loyal follower of the sun. He believes that the sun protects humanity. Nick clenched his fists. I hate this. There's nothing I can do. The champion is more powerful than me, and even if I had the power to assassinate him, I wouldn't be able to explain that to the sun. I am powerless. If the champion knows enough about me, he can tell the sun and I will die. And then, humanity will be doomed to an eternity of slaving away in this bastardized recycling center that is Earth. Nick felt helpless. The die had been cast. The result was clear, and it was his opponent's turn. The only thing Nick could do was wait. Over the next years, the beam stopped changing color. The wait was agonizing. Every day, Nick feared that the sun might kill him. But it never happened. Even 10 years later, nothing changed. If the champion found out about my past, I would already be dead. Unless he found out and doesn't consider me his enemy anymore. I have to investigate. Nick paused his work and appeared on the surface again. Next, he read the minds of several researchers and powerful protectors to learn how to gain access to the new database. Of course, for security reasons, only 3 people had access to write any code or edit important articles. If Nick wanted to gain access to these features, he would need to interact with the database's physical machine. But that was inside Aegis headquarters, and going there would be a death sentence. Nick read through the newest articles. Nothing out of the ordinary. But then Nick's eyes narrowed. In the section documenting historical culture, Nick found a short fable. Nick the sheep, Nick thought. Seeing his old name in Aegis database couldn't mean anything good. Nobody would pay this fable any mind or believe that this was related to real-life events. After all, who would have such a stupid name? Nick quickly read through the fable, and after he was done, he just looked in the direction of Aegis headquarters. He knows. He knows almost everything. But how? How did he find out? Why now? He had no reason to question the trickster's very fundamentals. Nick furrowed his brows. Unless the former right arm and the Inferno said some things they shouldn't have. I didn't tell them to say anything to the champion. They were supposed to attack him immediately and die. But I didn't control their minds as much. They also didn't remember any important things. Did they sow doubt in the champion? Nick took a deep breath. They were human like all of us. Maybe they just wanted to help. The fable of Nick, the sheep, basically retold the events that happened in Crimson City. Nick, the sheep, lived in an enclosure that was protected from the wolves. The enclosure was owned by a powerful and kind farmer who employed a farmhand to take care of most of the business. The sun and the champion. The farmer said that he only raised the sheep for their wool, and the farmhand followed all of the farmer's orders happily. The fable ended when Nick the sheep died, and it ended on a cliffhanger that stated that a new and very competent sheep appeared on the farm. It had a very direct name. Nick the Farm Ender. Nick Dusk. The champion knows enough to kill me, but he didn't do so. That means he is undecided. He doesn't want to act without certainty. When Nick noticed that this article could be edited by anyone, he knew what the champion wanted to do. He wanted to communicate with Nick. Nick took a deep breath. If I don't act, the champion might kill me. Nick pressed the edit button and added more to the story. Nick the Farm Ender arrived, and it immediately started to act horribly. It killed sheep and subjugated others. And yet the farm owner didn't do anything about it. The owner just took the corpses away to an unknown place. The farmhand hated Nick the Farm Ender, but without the owner's permission, he wasn't allowed to stop its rampage. One day, the farmhand secretly followed the farm owner, and that's when he saw something shocking. The farm owner gutted the corpses and fed them to the wolves. Since this was a fable, the wolves and sheep could talk. In exchange for the sheep meat, the wolves rewarded the farm owner with gold. The gold they gave the farm owner was far greater than what he would have gotten by selling the wool. "We scare them," the lead wolf said. "You protect them. Like this they will stay in one place, and we have an easy meal." The farm owner agreed. But just before the lead wolf left, he gave a last comment. "Your flock is growing too big for the enclosure. Get a bigger one or call them." The wolf smirked. "But if you kill them, make sure to give us all the meat."